Chapter 34. The Circle. Dawn was coming, a grey rumour, the faintest touch of brightness around the solemn outline of the walls of Carleon. The stars had all faded into a stony sky, but the moon still hung there, just above the treetops, seeming almost close enough to try an arrow at. West had not closed his eyes all night, and had passed into that strange realm of twitchy dream-like wakefulness that comes beyond exhaustion. Sometime in the silent darkness, after all the orders had been given, he had sat by the light of a single lamp to write a letter to his sister, to vomit up excuses, to demand forgiveness. He had sat, he could not have said for how long, with the pen over the paper, but the words had simply not come. He had wanted to say all that he felt, but when it came to it, he felt nothing. The warm taverns of Adua, cards in the sunny courtyard. Our day's one-sided smile. It all seemed 1,000 years ago. The Northmen were already busy, clipping at the grass in the shadow of the walls, the clicking of their shears a strange echo of the gardeners in the agrient, shaving a circle a dozen strides across down to the roots. The ground, he supposed, on which the duel would take place. The ground where, in no more than an hour or two, the fate of the North would be decided, very much like a fencing circle, except that it might soon be sprayed with blood. A barbaric custom, muttered Jezal, his thoughts evidently taking a similar course. Really, growled Pike, I was just now thinking what a civilized one it is. Civilized? 2 men butchering each other before a crowd. Better than a whole crowd butchering each other. A problem solved with only 1 man killed. That's a war ended. Well, to my mind. Jezal shivered and blew into his cupped hands. Still, a lot to hang on 2 men fighting one another. What if Nine Fingers loses? Then I suppose that Bethod will go free, said West unhappily. But he invaded the Union. He caused the deaths of thousands. He deserves to be punished. People rarely get what they deserve. West thought of Prince Ladisl's bones rotting out in the wasteland. Some terrible crimes go unpunished, and a few, for no reason beyond the fickle movements of chance, are richly rewarded. He stopped in his tracks. A man was sitting on his own on the long slope, his back to the city. A man hunched over in a battered coat, so still and quiet in the half-light that West had almost missed him. I'll catch you up, he said as he left the path. The grass, coated with a pale fur of frost, crunched gently under his boots with each step. Pull up a chair. Breath smoked gently round Nine Fingers' darkened face. West squatted down on the cold earth beside him. Are you ready? 10 times before I've done this. Can't say I've ever yet been ready. Don't know that there is a way to get ready for a thing like this. The best I've worked out is just to sit and let the time crawl past, and try not to piss yourself. I imagine a wet crotch could be an embarrassment in the circle. Aye, better than a split head, though, I reckon. Undeniably true. West had heard tales of these northern duels before, of course. Growing up in England, children whispered lurid stories of them to each other, but he had little idea how they were really conducted. How does this business work? They mark out a circle. Round the edge men stand with shields, half from one side, half from the other, and they make sure no one leaves before it's settled. 2 men go into the circle. The one that dies there is the loser, unless someone has it in mind to be merciful. Can't see that happening today, though, somehow. Also undeniable. What do you fight with? Each one of us brings something. Could be anything. Then there's a spin of a shield, and the winner picks the weapon he wants. So you might end up fighting with what your enemy brought. It can happen. I killed Shama heartless with his own sword, and got stuck through with the spear I brought to fight Harding Grim. He rubbed at his stomach as though the memory ached there. Still, don't hurt any worse, getting stuck with your own spear instead of someone else. West laid a hand thoughtfully on his own gut. No. They sat in silence for a while longer. There's a favor I'd like to ask you. Name it. Would you and your friends hold shields for me? Us. West blinked towards the carles in the shadow of the wall. Their great round shields looked hard enough to lift, let alone to use well. Are you sure? I've never held one in my life. Maybe, but you know whose side you're on. There ain't many folk among these that I can trust. Most of them are still trying to work out who they hate more, me or Bethod. It only takes one to give me a shove when I need a push, or let me fall when I need catching. Then we're all done, me especially. West puffed out his cheeks. We'll do what we can. Good. The cold silence dragged out. Over the Black Hills, The black trees. The moon sank and grew dimmer. Tell me, furious, do you reckon a man has to pay for the things he's done? West looked up sharply, the irrational and sickly thought flashing through his mind that Nine Fingers was talking of R.D., or of Ladisla, or both. Certainly, the Northman's eyes seemed to glint with accusation in the half-light. Then West felt the surge of fear subside. Nine Fingers was talking of himself, of course, as everyone always does, given the chance. It was guilt in his eyes, not accusation. Each man has his own mistakes to follow him. Maybe. West cleared his dry throat. Sometimes. I don't know. I suppose we've all done things we regret. Hey, said Nine Fingers, I reckon. They sat together in silence and watched the light leak across the sky. Let's go, Chief, hissed Dow. Let's fucking go. I'll say when. Dogman spat back, holding the dewy branches out of the way and peering towards the walls. 100 strides off, maybe across a damp meadow. Too much light now. We'll wait for that bloody moon to drop a touch further. Then we'll make a run at it. It ain't gonna get any darker. Bethod can't have too many men left after all the ones we killed up in the mountains. And that's a lot of walls. They'll be spread thin as cobwebs up there. It only takes 1, 2, and Dow was off across that field and running, as plain on the flat grass as a turd on a snowfield. Shit, hissed Dogman, helpless. Said Grim. There was nothing to do but stare and wait for Dow to get stuck full of arrows, wait for the shouts and torches lit, and the alarm to go up, and the whole thing dumped right in the shithole. Then Dow dashed up the last bit of slope, and was gone into the shadows by the wall. He made it, said Dogman. Said Grim. That ought to have been a good thing, but Dogman didn't feel too much like laughing. He had to make the run himself now, and he didn't have Dow's luck. He looked at Grim, and Grim shrugged. They burst out from the trees together, feet pounding across the soft meadow. Grim had the longer legs, started pulling away. The ground was a good deal softer than Dogman had. Gah! His foot squelched to the ankle, and he went flying over, splashed down in the mire and slid along on his face. He floundered up, cold and gasping, ran the rest of the way with his wet shirt plastered against his skin. He stumbled up the slope to the foot of the walls and bent over, hands to his knees, blowing hard and spitting out grass. Looks like you took a tumble there, Chief. Dow's grin was a white curve in the shadows. You mad bastard! Hissed Dogman, his temper flaring up hot in his cold chest. You could have been the deaths of all of us. Oh, there's still time. Shh. Grim flailed one hand at them to say keep quiet. Dogman pressed himself tight to the wall, worry snuffing his anger out quick time. He heard men moving up above, saw the glimmer of a lamp pass slow down the walls. He waited, still. No sound but Dow's quiet breath beside him, and his own heart pounding, till the men above moved on, and all was quiet again. Tell me that ain't got your blood flowing quick, Chief, whispered Dow. We're lucky it ain't flowing right out of us. What now? Dogman gritted his teeth as he tried to scrape the mud out of his face. Now we wait. Logen stood up, brushed the dew from his trousers, took a long breath of the chill air. There could be no denying any longer that the sun was well and truly up. It might have been hidden in the east behind Scarling's Hill, but the tall black towers up there had bright golden edges. The thin high clouds were pinking underneath, the cold sky between turning pale blue. Better to do it, Logen whispered under his breath, than live with the fear of it. He remembered his father telling him that, saying it in the smoky hall, light from the fire shifting on his lined face, long finger wagging. Logen remembered telling it to his own son, smiling by the river, teaching him to tickle fish, father and son, both dead now, earth and ashes. No one would learn it after Logen, once he was gone. No one would miss him much at all, he reckoned. But then who cared? There's nothing worth less than what men think of you after you're back in the mud. He wrapped his fingers round the grip of the Maker's sword, felt the scored lines tickling at his palm. He slid it from the sheath and let it hang, worked his shoulders round in circles, jerked his head from side to side, one more cold breath in and out. Then he started walking, up through the crowd that had gathered in a wide arc around the gate, a mix of the Dogman's Carls and Crummock's hillmen, and a few Union soldiers given leave to watch the crazy Northerners kill each other. Some called to him as he came through, all knowing there were a lot more lives hanging on this than Logen's own. It's 9 fingers! The bloody 9! Put an end to this! Kill that bastard! They had their shields, all the men that Logen had picked to hold them, standing in a solemn knot near the walls. West was one, and Pike, and Red Hat, and Shivers too. Logen wondered if he'd made a mistake with the last of them, but he'd saved the man's life in the mountains, and that ought to count for something. Ought was a thin thread to hang your life on, but there it was. His life had been dangling from a thin thread ever since he could remember. Cromach fell into step beside him, big shield looking small on one big arm, the other hand resting light on his fat belly. You looking forward to this then, bloody 9? I am, I can tell you that. Hands slapped at his shoulders, voices called encouragement, but Logen said nothing. He didn't look left or right as he pushed past into the shaven circle. He felt men close in behind him, heard them set their shields in a half-ring round the edge of the short grass, facing the gates of Carleon. Further back the crowd pressed in tight, whispering to each other, straining to see. No way back now. That was a fact. But then there never had been. He'd been heading here all his days. Logen stopped in the center of the circle, and he turned his face up towards the battlements. "It's sunrise," he roared. "Let's get to it." There was silence, while the echoes died, and the wind pushed some loose leaves around the grass. A silence long enough for Logen to start hoping no one would answer. To start hoping they'd all somehow slipped away in the night, and there'd be no duel after all. Then faces appeared on the walls. One here, one there, then a whole crowd, lining the parapet as far as Logen could see in both directions. Hundreds of folk-fighting men, women, children even, up on shoulders. Everyone in the city, it looked like. Metal squealed, and wood creaked, and the tall gates ever so slowly swung apart, the glare of the rising sun spilling out the crack between, then pouring bright through the open archway. 2 lines of men came tramping out, carles, all hard faces and tangled hair, heavy mail jingling, painted shields on their arms. Logen knew a few of them, some of Bethod's closest who'd been with him since the beginning. Hard men all who'd held the shields for Logen more than once, back in the old days. They formed up in their own halfring, closing the circle tight. A wall of shields, animal faces, trees and towers, flowing water, crossed axes, all of them scarred and scuffed from 100 old fights. All of them turned in towards Logen. A cage of men and wood, and the only way out was to kill. Or to die, of course. A black shape formed in the bright archway, like a man, but taller, seeming to fill it all the way to the high keystone. Logen heard footsteps, thumping footsteps, heavy as falling anvils. A strange kind of fear tugged at him. A mindless panic, as if he'd woken trapped under the snow again. He forced himself not to look over his shoulder at Cromach, forced himself to look ahead as Bethod's champion stepped out into the dawn. "By the fucking dead," breathed Logen. He thought at first it must be some trick of the light that made him look the size he did. Tulduru Thunderhead had been a big bastard, no doubt, big enough that some had called him a giant. But he'd still looked like a man. Fenris the Feared was built on such a scale that he seemed something else, a race apart. A giant indeed, stepped out from old stories and made flesh, a lot of flesh. His face squirmed as he walked, great bald head jerking from side to side. His mouth sneered and grinned, his eyes winked and bulged by turns. One half of him was blue, no other way to put it. A neat line down his face divided blue skin from pale. His huge right arm was white. His left was blue all the long way from shoulder to the tips of his great fingers. In that hand he carried a sack, swinging back and forward with each step, bulging as if it was stuffed with hammers. A couple of Bethod's shield carriers cringed out of his way, looking like children beside him, grimacing as if death itself was breathing on their necks. The Feared stepped through into the circle, and Logen saw the blue marks were writing, just as the spirit had told him, twisted symbols, scrawled over every part of his left side hand, arm, face, lips even. The words of Glustrad written in the old time. The Feared stopped a few strides distant, and a sickly horror seemed to wash out from him and over the silent crowd, as if a great weight was pressing on Logen's chest, squeezing out his courage. But the task was simple enough, in its way. If the Feared's painted side couldn't be harmed, Logen would just have to carve the rest of him, and carve it deep. He'd beaten some hard men in the circle, 10 of the hardest bastards in all the north, This was just one more, or so he tried to tell himself. Where's Bethod? He'd meant to bellow it all defiance, but it came out a tame, dry squawk. I can watch you die just as well from up here. The king of the Northmen stood on the battlements above the open gate, well-groomed and happy, pale as snow, and a few guards stood about him. If he'd had any trouble sleeping, Logen would never have known it. The morning breeze stirred his hair and the thick fur around his shoulders. The morning sun shone on the golden chain, struck sparks from the diamond on his brow. Glad you came. I was worried you'd make a run for it. He gave a carefree sigh and it smoked on the sharp air. It's morning, like you said. Let's get started. Logen looked into the Feared's bulging, twitching, crazy eyes and swallowed. We're gathered here to witness a challenge, roared Crummock. A challenge to put an end to this war and settle the blood between Bethod, who's taken to calling himself King of the Northmen, and Furious, who speaks for the Union. Bethod wins, the siege is lifted, and the Union leaves the north. Furious wins, then the gates of Carleon are opened, and Bethod stands at his mercy. Do I speak true? You do, said West, his voice sounding small in all that space. Aye. Up on his walls, Bethod waved a lazy hand. Get to it, fat man. Then name yourselves champions, shouted Crummock, and list your pedigree. Logen took a step forward. It was a hard step to take, as if he was pushing against a great wind, but he took it anyway, tilted his head back, and looked the Feared full in his writhing face. I'm the Bloody Nine, and there's no number on the men I've killed. The words came out soft and dead. No pride in his empty voice, but no fear either. A cold fact, cold as the winter. 10 challenges I've given, and I won 'em all. In this circle I beat Shama Heartless, Rudd Three Trees, Harding Grim, Tul Duru Thunderhead, Black Dow, and more besides. If I listed the named men I've put back in the mud, we'd be here at sunrise tomorrow. There's not a man in the north don't know my work. Nothing changed in the giant's face, nothing more than usual at least. My name is Fenris the Feared. My achievements are all in the past. He held up his painted hand and squeezed the great fingers, and the sinews in his huge blue arm bulged like knotted tree roots. With these signs great Glustrad marked me out his chosen. With this hand I tore down the statues of Alcus. Now I kill little men in little wars. Logen could just make out a tiny shrug of his massive shoulders. Such is the way of things. Crummock looked at Logen, and he raised his brows. All right then. What weapons have you carried to the fight? Logen lifted the heavy sword, forged by Canidius for his war against the Magi, and held it up to the light, astride of dull metal. The edge glittered faintly in the pale sunrise. This blade! He stabbed it down into the earth between them and left it standing there. The Feared threw his sack rattling down, and it sagged open. Inside were great black plates, spiked and studded, scarred and battered. This armor. Logen looked at that vast weight of dark iron, and licked his teeth. If the Feared won the spin, he could take the sword and leave Logen with a pile of useless armor way too big for him. What would he do then? Hide under it. He only had to hope his luck stuck out a few minutes longer. All right, my beauties. Crummock set his shield down on its rim, and took hold of the edge. Painted or plain, 9 fingers. Painted. Crummock ripped the shield round and set it spinning. Round and round it went, painted, plain, plain. Hope and despair swapped with every turn. The wood started to wobble on its rim. It dropped down flat, plain side up, the straps flopping. So much for luck. Crummock winced. He looked up at the giant. You've got the choice, big lad. The Feared took hold of the Maker's blade and slid it from the earth. It looked like a toy in his monstrous hand. His bulging eyes rolled up to Logen's, and his great mouth twisted into a smile. He tossed the sword down at Logen's feet, and it dropped in the dirt. Take your knife, little man. The sound of raised voices floated thin on the breeze. All right, hissed Dow, much too loud for the dogman's nerves. They're getting started? I can hear that. Dogman snapped, coiling the rope round and round into easy circles, ready to throw. You know what you're doing with that? I could do without it dropping on me. That's so. Dogman swung the grapple back and forward a touch, feeling the weight. I was just thinking that, after it's sticking in that wall, It sticking in your fat head was the second best outcome. He spun it round in a circle, then a wider one, letting some rope slip through his hand. Then he hefted it all the way and let it fly. It sailed up, real neat, the rope uncoiling after it, and over the battlements. Dogman winced as he heard it clatter on the walkway, but no one came. He pulled on the rope. A stride or two slid down, and then it caught. Felt firm as a rock. "First time," said Grim. Dogman nodded, hardly able to believe it himself. "What are the odds? Who's first?" Dow grinned at him. "Whoever's got hold of the rope now, I reckon." As the dogman started climbing, he found he was going over all the ways a man could get killed going up this wall. Grapple slipped, and he fell. Rope frayed and snapped, and he fell. Someone had seen the grapple, was waiting for him to get to the top before they cut the rope, or they were waiting for him to get to the top before they cut his throat, or they were just now calling for a dozen big men to take prisoner whatever idiot it was trying to climb into a city on his own. His boots scuffled at the rough stone, the hemp bit at his hands, his arms burned at the work, and all the while he did his best to keep his rasping breath quiet. The battlements edged closer, then he was there. He hooked his fingers onto the stone and peered over. The walkway was empty, both ways. He slipped over the parapet, sliding a knife out just in case. You can never have too many knives and all that. He checked the grapple was caught firm. Then he leaned over, saw Dow at the bottom looking up, Grim with the rope in his hands, one foot on the wall, ready to climb. Dogman beckoned to him to say come. Watched him start up, hand over hand, Dow holding to the bottom of the rope to stop it flapping. Soon enough he was halfway. What the fuck? Dogman jerked his head left. There were a pair of thralls not far off, just stepped out from a door to the nearest tower and onto the wall. They stared at him, and he stared back. Seemed like the longest time. "There's a rope here. There's a rope here," he shouted, brandishing his knife around and making like he was trying to cut it away from the grapple. "Some bastards trying to climb in." "By the dead!" One came running, gawped down at Grim swinging around. "He's coming up now." The other one pulled his sword out. "Don't worry about that." He lifted it grinning, ready to chop through the rope. Then he stopped. "Care why you all muddy?" Dogman stabbed him in the chest hard as he could, and again. "Ee!" wailed the thrall, face screwed up, lurching back against the battlements and dropping his sword over the side. His mate came charging up, swinging a big mace. Dogman ducked under it, but the thrall barreled into him and brought him down on his back, head cracking on stone. The mace clattered away and they wrestled around, the thrall kicking and punching while Dogman tried to get his hands round his throat, stop him from calling out. They rolled over one way, then back the other, struggled up to standing and tottered about down the walkway. The thrall got his shoulder in Dogman's armpit and shoved him back up against the battlements, trying to bundle him over. "Shit!" gasped the dogman as his feet left the ground. He could feel his arse scraping the stone, but still he clung on, hands tight round the thrall's neck, stopping him getting a good breath. He went up another inch, felt his head forced back, almost more weight on the wrong side of the parapet than the right. "Over you go, you fucker," croaked the thrall, working his chin away from Dogman's hands and pushing him a touch further. "Over you." His eyes went wide. He stumbled back, a shaft sticking out of his side. "Oh, I don't." Another thumped into his neck and he lurched a step. Would have fallen off the back of the wall if the dogman hadn't grabbed his arm and dragged him down onto the walkway, held him there while he slobbered his last breaths. When he was finished, Dogman rolled up and stood bent over the corpse, breathing. Grim hurried over, taking a good look around to make sure no one else was likely to happen by. "All right, just once I'd like to get the help before I'm at the point of getting killed. Better'n after." The dogman had to admit there was some truth to that. He watched Dow pull himself over the battlements and roll down onto the walkway. The thrall dogman had stabbed was still breathing, just about, sat near the grapple. Dow chopped a piece out of his skull with his axe as he walked past, careless as if he was chopping logs. He shook his head. "I leave the two o' you alone for 10 breaths together and look what happens." "Two dead men, eh?" Dow leaned down, stuck 2 fingers in one of the holes Dogman's knife had made, pulled them out and smeared blood across one side of his face. He grinned up. "What do you reckon we can do with 2 dead men?" The feared seemed to fill the circle, one half bare and blue, the other cased in black iron, a monster torn free from legends. There was nowhere to hide from his great fists, nowhere to hide from the fear of him. Shields rattled and clashed, men roared and bellowed. A sea of blurred faces twisted with mad fury. Logen crept around the edge of the short grass, trying to keep light on his feet. He might have been smaller, but he was quicker, cleverer. At least he hoped he was. He had to be, or he was mud. Keep moving, rolling, ducking, stay out of the way and pick his moment. Above all, don't get hit. Not getting hit was the first thing. The giant came at him out of nowhere, his great tattooed fist a blue blur. Logen threw himself out of the way, but it still grazed his cheek and caught his shoulder, sent him stumbling. So much for not getting hit. A shield, and not a friendly one, shoved him in the back, and he lurched the other way, head whipping forward. He pitched on his face, nearly cut himself on his own sword, rolled desperately to the side and saw the Feared's huge boot thud into the ground, soil flying where his skull had been a moment before. Logen scrabbled up in time to see the blue hand coming at him again. He ducked underneath it, hacked at the Feared's tattooed flesh as he reeled past. The Maker's sword thudded deep into the giant's thigh like a spade into turf. The huge leg buckled, and he dropped forward onto his armored knee. It should have been a killing blow, right through the big veins, but there was hardly more blood than from a shaving scratch. Still, if one thing fails you, try another. Logen roared as he chopped at the Feared's bald head. The blade clanged against the armor on the giant's right arm, raised just in time. It scraped down that black steel and slid off, harmless, chopping into the earth and leaving Logen's hands buzzing. Oof! The Feared's knee sank into his gut, folded him up and sent him staggering, needing to cough but not having the air to do it. The giant had already found his feet again, armored hands swinging back, a lump of black iron the size of a man's head. Logen dived sideways, rolling across the short grass, felt the wind of the great arm ripping past him. It crashed into the shield where he'd been standing, broke it into splintered pieces, flung the man holding it wailing into the earth. It seemed the spirit had been right. The painted side couldn't be hurt. Logen crouched, waiting for the clawing pain in his stomach to fade enough for him to breathe, trying to think of some trick to use and coming up with nothing. The Feared turned his writhing face towards Logen. Behind him on the ground, the felled man whimpered under the wreckage of his shield. The carls either side of him shuffled in to close the gap with some reluctance. The giant took a slow step forwards, and Logen took a painful step back. Still alive, he whispered to himself. But how long for, it was hard to say. West had never in his life felt so scared, so exhilarated, so very much alive, not even when he won the contest with all the wide square of marshals cheering for him. Not even when he stormed the walls of Ulriach and burst out from the dust and chaos into the warm sunlight. His skin tingled with hope and horror. His hands jerked helplessly with 9 fingers movements. His lips murmured pointless advice, silent encouragement. Beside him, Pike and Jalen jostled, shoved, shouted themselves hoarse. Behind them, the wide crowd roared, straining to see. On the walls they leaned out, screaming and shaking their fists in the air. The circle of men flexed with the movements of the fighters, never still, bowing out and sucking in as the champions came forward or fell back. And almost always, so far, the one falling back was 9 fingers. A great brute of a man by most standards, he seemed tiny, weak, and brittle in that terrifying company. To make matters a great deal worse, there was something very strange at work here. Something West could only have called magic. Great wounds, deadly wounds, closed in the Feared's blue skin, before his very eyes. This thing was not a man. It could only be a devil, and whenever it towered over him, West felt a fear as though he was standing at the very verge of hell. West grimaced as 9 fingers lurched helplessly against the shields on the far side of the circle. The Feared raised his armored fist to deliver a blow that could surely crush a skull to jelly. But it hit nothing but air. And then fingers jerked away at the last moment, and let the iron miss his jaw by a hair. His heavy sword slashed down, bounced off the Feared's armored shoulder with a resounding clang. The giant stumbled back, and 9 fingers came after him. Pale scars stretched on his rigid face. "Yes," hissed West, the men around him bellowing their approval. The next blow shrieked down the giant's armored side, leaving a long bright scratch and digging up a great sod of earth. The last chopped deep into his painted ribs and spat out a misty spray of blood, knocked him flailing off balance. West's mouth opened wide as the great shadow fell across him. The feared toppled against his shield like a falling tree and drove him trembling to his knees, wilting under the great weight, his stomach rolling with horror and disgust. Then he saw one of the buckles on the spiked and studded armor, just below the giant's knee, was inches from the fingers of West's free hand. All he could think of, in that moment, was that Bethod might escape, after all the dead men he had left, scattered up and down the length of England. He gritted his teeth and snatched hold of the end of the leather strap, thick as a man's belt. He dragged at it as the feared shoved his huge bulk up. The buckle came jingling open. The armor on the mighty calf flapped loose as his foot thumped down again, as his arm lashed out and knocked 9 fingers stumbling away. West struggled from the dirt, already greatly regretting his impulsiveness. He glanced around the circle, searching for any sign that someone had seen him, but all eyes were fixed on the fighters. It seemed now a tiny, petulant sort of sabotage that could never make the slightest difference, beyond getting him killed, of course. It was a fact he had known from childhood. Catch you cheating in a northern duel, and they'll cut the bloody cross in you and pull your guts out. Gah! Logen jerked away from the armored fist, tottered to his right as the blue one rushed past his face, dived to his left as the iron hand lashed at him again, slid and nearly fell. Any one of those blows had been hard enough to take his head off. He saw the painted arm go back, gritted his teeth as he dodged around another of the feared's mighty punches, already swinging the sword up and over. The blade sheared neatly through the blue arm, just below the elbow, sent it tumbling away across the circle, along with a gout of blood. Logen heaved air into his burning lungs and raised the Maker's sword high, setting himself for one last effort. The feared's eyes rolled up towards the dull gray blade. He jerked his head to one side and it chopped deep into his painted skull, showering out specks of dark blood and splitting his head down to the eyebrow. The giant's armored elbow crunched into Logen's ribs, half lifted him off his feet and flung him kicking across the circle. He bounced from a shield and sprawled on his face, lay there spitting out dirt while the blurry world spun around him. He winced as he pushed himself up, blinked the tears out of his eyes, and froze. The feared stepped forward, sword still buried deep in his skull, and picked up his severed arm. He pressed it against the bloodless stump, twisted it to the right, then back to the left, and let it go. The great forearm was whole again. The letters ran from shoulder to wrist unbroken. The men around the circle fell silent. The giant worked his blue fingers for a moment, then he reached up and closed his hand around the hilt of the Maker's sword. He turned it one way, then the other, his skull crunching as bones shifted. Then he tossed the sword across the circle, and it clattered down in front of Logen for the second time that day. Logen stared at it, his chest heaving. It was getting heavier with each exchange. The wounds he'd taken in the mountains ached. The blows he'd taken in the circle throbbed. The air was still cold, but his shirt was sticky with sweat. The feared showed no sign of tiring even with half a ton of iron strapped to his body. There wasn't so much as a bead of sweat on his twisting face. Not so much as a scratch on his tattooed scalp. Logen felt the fear pressing hard on him again. He knew now how the mouse felt when the cat had him between his paws. He should have run and never looked back, but instead he'd chosen this. Say one thing for Logen Ninefingers, say that bastard never learns. The giant's mouth crawled up into a wriggling smile. More, he said. Dogman needed to piss as he walked up to the gate of Carleon's inner wall. Always needed to piss at times like this. He had one of the dead thrall's clothes on, big enough that he'd had to pull the belt too tight, cloak hanging over the bloody knife hole in the shirt. Grim was wearing the other's gear, bow over one shoulder, the big mace hanging from his free hand. Dow slumped between them, wrists tied at his back, feet scraping stupidly at the cobbles, bloody head hanging like they'd given him quite the beating. Seemed a pitiful kind of a ruse, if the dogman was being honest. There were 50 things he'd counted since they climbed off the walls that could have given them away, but there was no time for anything cleverer. Talk well and smile, and no one would notice the clues. That's what he hoped anyway. A guard stood each side of the wide archway, a pair of carls in long mail coats and helmets, both with spears in their hands. "What's this?" one asked. frowning as they walked up close. "Found this bastard trying to creep in." Dogman gave Dow a punch in the side of the head, just to make things look good. "We're taking him down below. Lock him up till after they're done." He made to walk on past. One of the guards stopped him cold with a hand on his chest, and the dogman swallowed. The Carl nodded towards the city's gates. "How's it going down there?" "All right, I guess," Dogman shrugged. "It's going anyway. Bethod'll come out on top, eh? He always does, don't he?" "I don't know," the Carl shook his head. "That feared puts the fucking wind up me. Him and that bloody witch. Can't say I'll cry too hard if the bloody 9 kills the pair of beam." The other one chuckled, pushed his helmet onto the back of his scalp, bringing up a cloth to wipe the sweat underneath. "You got a Dow," sprang forward, loose bits of rope flapping round his wrists, and buried a knife all the way up to the hilt in the Carl's forehead. Dropped him like a chair with the legs kicked away. Same moment, almost, Grimm's borrowed mace clunked into the top of the eater's helmet and left a great dent in it, jammed the rim right down almost to the tip of his nose. He dribbled some, stumbling back like he was drunk. Then blood came bubbling out of his ears and he fell down on his back. Dogman turned round, trying to hold his stolen cloak out so no one would see Dow and Grimm dragging the 2 corpses away, but the town seemed empty. Everyone watching the fight, no doubt. He wondered for a moment what was happening, out there in the circle, long enough to get a nasty feeling in his gut. "Come on." He turned to see Dow grinning all across his bloody face. The 2 bodies he'd just wedged behind the gates, one of them staring cross-eyed at the knife hole in his head. "That good enough?" asked Dogman. "What, you want to say a few words for the dead, do you? You know what I mean, if someone—" "No time for clever now." Dow grabbed him by the arm and pulled him through the gate. "Let's kill us a witch." The sole of the Feared's metal boot thudded into Logen's chest, ripped his breath out and rammed him into the earth, the sword tumbling from his clawing hand, puke burning at the back of his throat. Before he knew where he was, a great shadow fell across him. Metal snapped shut round his wrist, tight as a vise. His legs were kicked away, and he was on his face, arm twisted behind him and a mouthful of dirt to think about. Something pressed against his cheek, cold at first, then painful. The Feared's great foot. His wrist was wrenched round, dragged up. His head was crushed further into the damp ground, short grass prickling up his nose. The tearing pain in his shoulder was awful. Soon it was a lot worse. He was caught fast and helpless, stretched out like a rabbit for skinning. The crowd had fallen breathlessly silent, the only sound the battered flesh round Logen's mouth squelching, the air squeaking in one squashed nostril. He would have screamed if his face hadn't been so squeezed that he could scarcely wheeze in half a breath. "Say one thing for Logen, Nenefingers. Say that he's finished. Back to the mud." And no one could have said he hadn't earned it. A fitting end for the bloody 9, torn apart in the circle. But the great arms didn't pull any further. Out the corner of one flickering eye, Logen could just see Bethod leaning against the battlements. The king of the Northmen waved his hand, round and round in a slow wheel. Logen remembered what it meant. Take your time. Make it last. Show them all a lesson they'll never forget. The Feared's great boot slid off his jaw, and Logen felt himself dragged into the air, limbs flopping like a puppet with the strings cut. The tattooed hand went up, black against the sun, and slapped Logen across the face, open-handed, as a father might cuff a troublesome child. It was like being hit with a pan. Light burst open in Logen's skull, his mouth filled with blood. Things drew into focus just in time for him to see the painted hand swing back the other way. It came down with a terrible inevitability, and cracked him a backhand blow, as a jealous husband might crack his helpless wife. "Gurg," he heard himself say, and he was flying. Blue sky, blinding sun, yellow grass, staring faces, all meaningless smears. He crashed into the shields at the edge of the circle, flopped half senseless to the earth. Far away men were shouting, screaming, hissing. But he couldn't hear the words and hardly cared. All he could think about was the cold feeling in his stomach, as if his guts were stuffed with swelling ice. He saw a pale hand, smeared with pink blood, white tendons starting from the scratched skin. His hand, of course. There was the stump. But when he tried to make the fingers open, they only clutched tighter at the brown earth. "Yes," he whispered, and blood drooled out of his numb mouth and trickled into the grass. The eyes spread out from his stomach, out to the very tips of his fingers, and turned every part of him numb. It was well that it did. It was high time. "Yes," he said. Up onto one knee, his bloody lips curling back from his teeth, his bloody right hand snaking through the grass, seeking out the hilt of the Maker's sword, closing tight around it. "Yes," he hissed, and Logen laughed, and the bloody nine laughed together. West had not expected Nine Fingers to get up, not ever again, but he did, and when he did, he was laughing. It sounded almost like weeping at first, a slobbering giggle, shrill and strange, but it grew louder, sharper, colder as he rose, as if at a cruel joke that no one else could see. A fatal joke. His head fell sideways like a hanged man's, livid face all slack around a hacked-out grin. Blood stained his teeth pink, trickled from the cuts on his face, seeped from his torn lips. The laughter gurgled up louder and louder, ripping at West's ears, jagged as a saw blade, more agonized than any scream, more furious than any war cry, awfully, sickeningly wrong, chuckling at a massacre, slaughterhouse giggling. Nine Fingers lurched forwards like a drunken man, swaying, wild, sword dangling from his bloody fist. His dead eyes glittered, wet and staring, pupils swollen to two black pits. His mad laughter cut, and grated, and hacked around the circle. West felt himself edging back, mouth dry. All the crowd edged back. They no longer knew who scared them more. Fenris the Feared, or the Bloody Nine. The world burned. His skin was on fire. His breath was scalding steam. The sword was a brand of molten metal in his fist. The sun stamped white-hot patterns into his prickling eyes, and the cold gray shapes of men and shields and walls, and of a giant made from blue words and black iron. Fear washed out from him in sickly waves, but the Bloody Nine only smiled the wider. Fear and pain were fuel on the fire, and the flames surged high and higher yet. The world burned, and at its center, the Bloody Nine burned hottest of all. He held out his hand and he curled the three fingers and he beckoned. "I am waiting," he said. The great fists lashed at the Bloody Nine's face. The great hands snatched at his body, but all the giant caught was laughter. Easier to strike the flickering fire, easier to catch the rolling smoke. The circle was an oven. The blades of yellow grass were tongues of yellow flame beneath it. The sweat spit. Blood dripped onto it like gravy from cooking meat. The Bloody Nine made a hiss, water on coals. The hiss became a growl, iron spattering from the forge. The growl became a great roar, the dry forest in flames, and he let the sword go free. The gray metal made searing circles, hacked bloodless holes in blue flesh, rang on black iron. The giant faded away, and the blade bit into the face of one of the men holding the shields. His head burst apart and sprayed blood across another, a hole torn from the wall around the circle. The others shuffled back, shields wavering, the circle swelling with their fear. They feared him more even than the giant, and they were wise, too. Everything that lived was his enemy, and when the Bloody Nine had made pieces of this devil thing, he would set to work on them. The circle was a cauldron. On the walls above the crowd surged like angry steam. The ground shifted and swelled under the Bloody Nine's feet like boiling oil. His roar became a scalding scream. The sword flashed down and clashed from spiked armor like a hammer on the anvil. The giant pressed his blue hand to the pale side of his head, face squirming like a nest of maggots. The blade had missed his skull, but stolen away the top half of his ear. Blood bubbled out from the wound, ran down the side of his great neck in two thin lines, and did not stop. The great eyes went wide, and the giant sprang forward with a thundering bellow. The Bloody Nine rolled under his flailing fist and slid round behind him, saw the black iron on his leg flap away, the bright buckle dangling. The sword snaked out and slid into the gap, deep into the great pale calf inside it. The giant roared in pain, spun, lurched on his wounded leg and fell to his knees. The circle was a crucible. The screaming faces of the men around its edge danced like smoke, swam like molten metal, their shields melting together. Now was the time. The morning sun blazed down. glinted bright on the heavy chest plate, marking the spot. Now was the beautiful moment. The world burned, and like a leaping flame the bloody nine reared up, arching back, raising high the sword, the work of Canidius, the master-maker. No blade forged sharper, its bitter edge scored a long gash in the black armor, through the iron and into the soft flesh beneath, striking sparks and spattering blood, the shriek of tortured metal mingling with the wail of pain torn from the Feared's twisted mouth. The wound it left in him was deep, but not deep enough. The giant's great arms slid round the bloody nine's back, folding him in a smothering embrace. The edges of the black metal pierced his flesh in a dozen places. Closer the giant drew him, and closer, and a ragged spike slid into the bloody nine's face, cut through his cheek and scraped against his teeth, bit into the side of his tongue and filled his mouth with salt blood. The Feared's grip was the weight of mountains. No matter how hot the bloody nine's rage, no matter how he squirmed and thrashed and screamed in fury, he was held as tightly as the cold earth holds the buried dead, the blood trickling from his face, and from his back, and from the great gash in the Feared's armor soaked into his clothes, and spread out blazing hot over his skin. The world burned. Above the oven, the cauldron, the crucible, Bethod nodded, and the giant's cold arms squeezed tighter. Dogman followed his nose. It rarely led him wrong, his nose, and he hoped to hell that it didn't fail him now. It was a sickly kind of a smell like sweet cakes left too long in the oven. He led the others along an empty hallway, down a shadowy stair, creeping through the damp darkness in the knotty bowels of Scarling's Hill. He could hear something now, as well as smell it, and it sounded as bad as it smelled. A woman's voice, singing soft and low. A strange kind of singing, in no tongue the dogman could understand. "That must be her," muttered Dow. "Don't like the sound of that one bit," Dogman whispered back. "Sounds like magic." "What do you expect? She's a fucking witch, ain't she? I'll go round behind." "No, wait on." But Dow was already creeping off the other way, boots padding soft and silent. Shit. Dogman followed the smell, creeping down the passageway with Grim at his back, the chanting coming louder and louder and louder. A streak of light slunk out from an archway, and he eased towards it, pressed his side to the wall, and took a peer round the corner. The room on the other side had about as witchy a look as a room could ever have. Dark and windowless, 3 other black doorways round the walls. It was lit just by one smoky brazier up at the far end, sizzling coals shedding a dirty red light on it all, giving off a sick, sweet stink. There were jars and pots scattered all round, bundles of twigs and grass and dried-out flowers hanging from the greasy rafters, casting strange shadows into the corners, like the shapes of hanged men swinging. There was a woman standing over the brazier with her back to the dogman. Her long, white arms were spread out wide, shining with sweat. Gold glinted round her thin wrists. Black hair straggled down her back. The dogman might not have known the words she was singing, but he could guess it was some dark work she was up to. Grim held up his bow, one eyebrow raised. Dogman shook his head, silently drew his knife. Tricky to kill her right off with a shaft, and who knew what she might do once she was shot. Cold steel in the neck left nothing to chance. Together they crept into the room. The air was hot in there, thick as swamp water. Dogman sneaked forward, trying not to breathe. Sure, the reek would throttle him if he did. He sweated, or the room did. Leastways his skin was beaded up with dew in no time. He picked his steps, finding a path between all the rubbish strewn across the floor boxes, bundles, bottles. He worked his damp palm round the grip of his knife, fixed his eyes on the point between her shoulders, the point he'd stab it into his foot, caught a jar and sent it clattering. The woman's head jerked round, the chant stopped dead on her lips. A gaunt, white face, pale as a drowned man's, black paint round her narrow eyes, blue eyes, cold as the ocean. The circle was silent. The men around its edge were still, their faces and their shields hanging limp. The crowd at their backs, the people pressed to the parapet above, all held motionless, all quiet as the dead. For all of Nine Fingers' mad rage, for all his twisting and his struggling, the giant had him fast. Thick muscles squirmed under blue skin as the Feared's great arms tightened and slowly crushed the life from him. West's mouth was bitter with helpless disappointment. All that he had done, all that he had suffered, All those lives lost for nothing. Bethod would go free. Then Nine Fingers gave an animal growl. The feared held him still, but his blue arm was trembling with the effort, as if he was suddenly weakened and could squeeze no further. Every sinew of West's own body was rigid as he watched. The thick strap of the shield bit into his palm. His jaw was clenched so tight that his teeth ached. The two fighters were locked together, straining against each other with every fiber and yet entirely still, frozen in the center of the circle. The dogman sprang forward, knife raised and ready. Stop! He froze solid in a moment. He'd never heard a voice like it. One word, and there was no thought in his head. He stared at the pale woman, his mouth open, his breath hardly moving, wishing that she'd say another. "You too," she said, glancing over at Grim, and his face went slack, and he grinned halfway through drawing his bow. She looked Dogman up and down, then pouted as if she was all disappointment. "Is that any way for guests to behave?" Dogman blinked. What the hell had he been thinking barging in here with a drawn blade? He couldn't believe he'd done such a thing. He blushed to the roots of his hair. "Oh, I'm sorry by the dead." "Gah," said Grim, throwing his bow into the corner of the room as if he'd suddenly realized he had a turd in his hand, then staring down at the arrow, baffled. She smiled, and the dogman found he was grinning like an idiot. Some spit might have come out of his mouth, maybe, just a bit, but he weren't that bothered. As long as she kept talking, nothing else seemed too much importance. She beckoned to them, long white fingers stroking at the thick air. "No need to stand so far away from me. Come closer." He and Grim stumbled towards her like eager children, Dogman near tripping over his feet. In his hurry to please, Grim barging into a table on the way, and coming close to falling on his face. "My name is Carleon." "Oh," said Dogman. "Most beautiful name ever, no doubt about it. Amazing that a single word could be so beautiful. Harding Grim's my name. Dogman, they call me. Count of a sharp sense o' smell and heir by the dead. But it was hard to think straight. There'd been something important he was meant to be doing, but for the life of him he couldn't think what." Dogman perfect. Her voice was soothing as a warm bath, as a soft kiss, as milk and honey. "Don't sleep yet." Dogman's head rolled, Coryb's painted face, a black and white blur, swimming in front of him. "Sorry," he gurgled, blushing again and trying to hide the knife behind his back. "Right sorry about the blade, no idea what. Don't worry. I am glad that you brought it. I think it would be best if you used it to stab your friend." Grim grinned and nodded back at him. "Hey, definitely. Right, good idea." Dogman lifted up the knife, seeming to weigh a ton. "Or anywhere you'd like him stabbed in particular? In the heart will do nicely. Right you are. Right? The heart it is." Grim turned front on to give him a better go at it. Dogman wiped some sweat from his forehead. "Here we go then." Damn it, but he was dizzy. He squinted at Grim's chest, wanting to make sure he got it right the first time, and didn't embarrass himself again. Just get it. The axe blade made a clicking sound as it split her head neatly down the middle, all the way to her chin. Blood sprayed out and spattered in Dogman's gawping face, and the witch's thin body slumped down on the stones like it was made of nothing but rags. Dow frowned as he twisted the haft of his axe this way and that, until the blade came free of Coryb's ruined skull with a faint sucking sound. "That bitch talks too much," he grunted. The bloody nine felt the change, like the first green shoot of spring, like the first warmth on the wind as the summer comes. There was a message in the way the feared held him. His bones were no longer groaning, threatening to burst apart. The giant's strength was less, and his was more. The bloody nine sucked in the air, and his rage burned hot as ever. Slowly, he dragged his face away from the giant's shoulder, felt the metal slide out from his mouth. He twisted until his neck was free, until he was staring into the giant's writhing face. The bloody nine smiled. Then he darted forward, fast as a shower of sparks, and sank his teeth deep into that big lower lip. The giant grunted, shifted his arms, tried to drag the bloody nine's head away, tear the biting teeth out of his mouth, but he could more easily have shaken off the plague. His arms loosened, and the bloody nine twisted the hand that held the maker's sword. He twisted it, as the snake twists in its nest, and slowly he began to work it free. The giant's blue left arm uncoiled from the Bloody Nine's body. His blue hand seized hold of the Bloody Nine's wrist, but there could be no stopping it. When the sapling seed finds a crack in the mountain, over long years, its deep roots will burst the very rock apart. So the Bloody Nine strained with every muscle, and let the slow time pass, hissing out his hatred into the feared's twitching mouth. The blade crept onwards slowly, and its very point bit into painted flesh, just below the giant's bottom rib. The Bloody Nine felt the hot blood trickling down the grip, and over his bunched fist, trickling out of the feared's mouth, and into his, running down his neck, leaking from the wounds across his back, dripping to the ground, just as it should be. Softly, gently, the blade slid into the feared's tattooed body, sideways, upwards, onwards. The great hands clawed at the Bloody Nine's arm, at his back, seeking desperately for some hold that might stop the terrible easing forward of that blade. But with every moment, the giant's strength melted away, like ice before a furnace. Easier to stop the white flow than to stop the Bloody Nine. The movement of his hands was the growing of a mighty tree, one hair's breadth at a time. But no flesh, no stone, no metal could stop it. The giant's painted side could not be harmed. Great Glustrod had made it so, long years ago in the old time, when the words were written upon the feared's skin. But Glustrod wrote on one half only. Slowly now, softly, gently, the point of the Maker's sword crossed the divide and into the unmarked half of him, dug into his innards, spitted him like meat made ready for the fire. The giant made a great high shriek, and the last strength melted from his hands. The Bloody Nine opened his jaws and let him free, one arm holding tight to his back, while the other drove the sword on into him. The Bloody Nine hissed laughter through his clenched teeth, dribbled laughter through the ragged hole in his face. He rammed the blade as far as it would go, and its point slid out between the plates of armor just beneath the giant's armpit and glinted red in the sun. Fenris, the feared, tottered backwards, still making his long squeal, his mouth hanging open and a string of red spit dangling from his lip, the painted half already healed over, the pale half tattered as mince meat. The circle of men watched him, frozen, gaping over the tops of their shields. His feet shuffled in the dirt, one hand fumbling for the red hilt of the Maker's sword, buried to the crosspiece in his side, blood dripping from the pommel and leaving red spots scattered across the ground. His squeal became a rattling groan. One foot tripped the other, and he toppled like a felled tree and crashed over on his back in the center of the circle, great arms and legs spread wide. The twitching of his face was finally still, and there was a long silence by the dead. It was spoken softly, thoughtfully. Logen squinted into the morning sun, saw the black shape of a man looking down at him from the high gatehouse. "By the dead, I never thought you'd do it." The world tipped from side to side as Logen began to walk, the breath hissing cold through the wound in his face, scraping in his raw throat. The men who had made the circle moved out of his way, now, their voices fallen silent, their shields hanging from their hands. "Never thought you could do it, but when it comes to killing, there's no man better. No man worse. I've always said so." Logen tottered through the open gates, found an archway, and began to climb the lurching steps, round and round, his boots hissing against the stone and leaving dark smears behind. The blood dripped, tap, 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 from the dangling fingers of his left hand. Every muscle ached. Bethod's voice dug at him. "But I get the last laugh, Bloody Nine? You're nothing but leaves on the water. Anyway the rain washes you." Logen stumbled on, ribs burning, jaws locked tight together, shoulders scraping against the curved wall. Up and round, his crackling breath echoing after. "You'll never have anything. You'll never be anything. You'll never make anything but corpses." Out onto the roof, blinking in the morning brightness, spitting a mouthful of blood over his shoulder. Bethod stood at the battlements. The named men stumbled out of Logen's way as he strode towards him. "You're made of death, Bloody Nine. You're made of..." Logen's fist crunched into his jaw, and he took a flopping step back. Logen's other hand smashed into his cheek, and he reeled against the parapet, a long string of bloody drool running from his split mouth. Logen caught the back of his head and jerked his knee up into Bethod's face, felt his nose crunch flat against it. Logen tangled his fingers in Bethod's hair, gripped it tight, pulled his head up high and rammed it down into the stones. "Die!" he hissed. Bethod jerked, gurgled. Logen lifted his head and drove it down again and again. The golden ring flew off his broken skull, bounced across the rooftop with a merry jingling. "Die!" Bone crunched, and blood shot out over the stone in fat drops and thin spatters. Pale as snow and his named men stared, white-faced, helpless and fearful, horrified and delighted. "Die, you fucker!" And Logen hauled Bethod's ruined corpse into the air with one last effort and flung it tumbling over the battlements. He watched it fall. He watched it crunch to the ground and lie, on its side, arms and legs stuck out awkwardly, fingers curled as if they were grasping at something, the head no more than a dark smear on the hard earth. All the faces of the crowds of men standing below were turned towards that corpse. Then slowly, eyes and mouths wide open, they lifted up to stare at Logen, Crummock Fail, standing in their midst, in the center of the shaved circle, beside the great body of the feared, slowly raised his long arm, the fat forefinger on the end of it pointing upwards. "The bloody nine!" he screamed. "King of the Northmen!" Logen gaped down at him, panting for breath, legs wobbling, trying to understand. The fury was gone and left nothing but terrible tiredness behind it. Tiredness and pain. "King of the Northmen!" Someone shrieked, way back in the crowd. "No," croaked Logen, but no one heard him. They were all too drunk with blood and fury, or busy thinking what was easiest, or too scared to say any different. The chants broke out all over. First a trickle of them, then a flow, and then a flood, and all Logen could do was watch, clinging to the bloody stone and trying not to fall. "The bloody nine!" King of the Northmen! Pale as snow was down on one knee beside him. Spots of Bethod's blood sprayed across the white fur on his coat. He always had been one to lick whatever arse was nearest, but he wasn't alone. They were all kneeling, up on the walls and down on the grass. The dogmen's Carls and Bethods, the men who'd held the shields for Logen and the ones who'd held the shields for the feared. Maybe Bethod had taught them a lesson. Maybe they'd forgotten how to be their own men, and now they needed someone else to tell them what to do. "No," whispered Logen. But all that came out was a dull slurp. He had no more power to stop it than he had to make the sky fall in. Seemed to him then that men do pay for the things they've done, all right. But sometimes the payment isn't what they expected. "The bloody nine!" roared Crummock again, as he sank down on his knees and lifted up his arms towards the sky. "King of the Northmen, Chapter 35, The Greater Good." The room was another overbright box. It had the same off-white walls, spotted with brown stains, mold or blood or both. The same battered table and chairs, virtually instruments of torture in themselves. The same burning pains in Glokta's foot and leg and back. Some things never change. The same prisoner, as far as anyone could have told, with the same canvas bag over their head, just like the dozens who have been through this room over the past few days, and just like the dozens more crammed into the cells beyond the door, waiting on our pleasure. "Very well," Glokta waved a tired hand. "Let us begin." Frost dragged the bag from the prisoner's head, a long, lean Cantic face with deep creases around the mouth and a neatly trimmed black beard streaked with gray. A wise, dignified face, deep-set eyes even now adjusting to the glare. Glokta burst out laughing. Each chuckle stabbed at the base of his stiff spine and rattled his stiff neck, but he could not help himself. "Even after all these years, fate can still play jokes on me." "Wath Futhi," grunted Frost. Glokta wiped his runny eye. "Practical Frost, we are truly honored. Our latest prisoner is none other than Master Farad, formerly of Yashtavit in Kanta, and more recently of a magnificent address at the top of the Kingsway. We are in the presence of the finest dentist in the circle of the world, and one must appreciate the irony." Farad blinked into the glaring lamplight. "I know you. Yes, you are the one who was a prisoner of the Gurkish. Yes, the one they tortured. I remember you were brought to me. Yes." Farad swallowed, as though the memory alone is enough to make him vomit. He glanced up at Frost, and the pink eyes glowered back, unblinking. He glanced round the grubby, blood-stained room, at the cracked tiles, at the scarred tabletop. His eyes lingered on the paper of confession lying upon it. After what they did to you, how can you do this now? Glokta showed Farad his toothless grin. After what they did to me, how could I do anything else? Why am I here? For the same reason as everyone else who comes here. Glokta watched Frost plant the heavy tips of his fingers on the paper of confession and slide it deliberately across the table towards the prisoner. To confess. To confess. Confess to what? Why, to spying for the Gurkish. Farad's face creased up with disbelief. I am no spy. The Gurkish took everything from me. I fled my home when they came. I am innocent, you must know this, of course, as have been all the spies who confessed in this room over the last few days. But they all confessed, without exception. Will you sign the paper? I have nothing to confess to. Why is it that no one can answer the questions I ask? Glokta stretched out his aching back, worked his creaking neck from side to side, rubbed at the bridge of his nose with finger and thumb. Why must they always make it so very difficult, for me and for themselves? Practical Frost, would you show the good master our work so far? The albino slid a dented tin bucket out from under the table, and dumped the contents without ceremony in front of the prisoner. Teeth clattered and slid and spun across the wood, hundreds of them, teeth of all shapes and sizes, from white through all the shades of yellow to brown. Teeth with bloody roots and with shreds of flesh attached. A couple tumbled from the far end of the table and bounced from the grimy tiles, clicked away into the corners of the narrow room. Farad gaped down in horror at the bloody mess of dentistry before him. And even the very Prince of Teeth can never have seen such a thing. Glokta leaned forwards. I dare say you've pulled a tooth or two before yourself. The prisoner nodded dumbly. Then you can probably imagine how tired I am after this lot. That's why I'd really like to be done with you as quickly as possible. I don't want you here, and you certainly don't want to be here. We can help each other. What must I do? Muttered Farad, his tongue moving nervously around his own mouth. It is not complicated. First you sign your confession. Thori, mumbled Frost, leaning forward and brushing a couple of teeth off the document, one of them leaving a long pink streak across the paper. Then you name two others. Two other what? Why, two other spies for the Gurkish, of course, from among your people. But I know no spies. Then some other names will have to serve. You have been named already several times. The dentist swallowed, then shook his head and pushed the paper away. A brave man, and a righteous one. But bravery and righteousness are bad virtues to have in this room. I will sign. But I will not name innocent men. God have mercy on me. I will not. God might have mercy on you, but he doesn't hold the pliers down here. Clamp him. Frost gripped Faraz's head from behind with one great white hand, tendons standing from the pale skin as he forced his mouth open. Then he shoved the clamp between Faraz's jaws and spun the nut round nimbly between finger and thumb until they were held wide open. Ah, gurgled the dentist. I know, and we're just getting started. Glokta pushed back the lid of his case, watched the polished wood, the sharpened steel, the shining glass spread outwards. What there was a disconcerting gap in the tools. For pity's sake, have you had the pliers out of here, Frost? No, grunted the albino, shaking his head angrily. Damn it! Can none of these bastards keep their own instruments? Go next door and see if we can borrow some at least. The practical lumbered from the room, the heavy door hanging ajar behind him. Glokta winced as he rubbed at his leg. Farad stared at him, spit running from one corner of his forced open mouth. His bulging eyes rolled sideways as a howl of pain came muffled from the corridor outside. I do apologize for this, said Glokta. We're usually a great deal more organized, but it's been busy as hell here the last few days. Such a lot to get through, you see. Frost pulled the door shut and handed Glokta a pair of rusty pliers, handles first. There was some dry blood, and a couple of curly hairs caked to the jaws. Is this the best they could do? These are dirty. Frost shrugged. Watha Ifrinth, a fair point, I suppose. Glokta gave a long sigh, struggled up from his chair and leaned forwards to peer into Farad's mouth. And a sweet set he has, too. A pearly white compliment. I suppose you'd expect prize-winning teeth from a prize-winning dentist. Anything else would be a poor advertisement for his trade. I applaud your cleanliness. It's a rare privilege to question a man who appreciates the importance of washing the mouth out. I can't say I've ever seen a better set of teeth. Glokta tapped at them happily with the pliers. It seems a shame to tear them all out, just so that you can confess in 10 minutes' time instead of now. But there we are. He closed the jaws around the nearest tooth, worked his hand around the handles. Gurgled Farad. Glah! Glokta pursed his lips as though considering, then released the pliers. Let us give the good master one further chance to talk. Frost unscrewed the clamp and pulled it from Farad's mouth along with a string of drool. Is there something you wish to say? I will sign, gasped Farad, a long tear running down one cheek. God help me, I will sign. And you will name 2 accomplices. Whatever you wish, please, whatever you wish. Excellent, said Glokta, as he watched the pen scratching against the paper of confession. Who's next? Glokta heard the lock behind him rattle. He scowled as he turned his head, preparing to scream at his presumptuous visitor. Your Eminence, he whispered, with barely concealed dismay, grimacing as he struggled to get up from his chair. No need to rise, I do not have all day. Glokta found himself frozen in the most painful possible position, bent somewhere between sitting and standing, and had to sag back into his chair with little grace as Salt swept into the room, 3 of his huge practicals looming silently in the unsilently doorway behind him. You may ask your freak of nature to leave us. Frost's eyes narrowed, flickered over the other practicals, then back to Salt. Very good, Practical Frost, said Glokta hastily. You may remove our prisoner. The albino unlocked Farad's manacles and dragged the dentist from his chair with one white fist, hauled him gasping by his collar to the door at the back of the room and ripped back the bolt with his free hand. He gave one pink glare over his shoulder and Salt glared back. Then he slammed the door behind him. His Eminence slid into the chair opposite Glokta, no doubt still warm from the sweating arse of the brave and righteous Master Farad. He brushed some of the teeth from the tabletop before him with the side of one gloved hand and sent them clicking onto the floor. And he could not have seemed to care less had they been breadcrumbs. There is a deadly conspiracy afoot within the Agriant. Have we made progress in unmasking it? I have interviewed most of the Cantic prisoners, extracted a suitable number of confessions. There should not be. Salt gave an angry wave of his hand. Not that, half-wit. I refer to that bastard Morovia and his pawns, the so-called first of the Magi and our so-called king. Your Eminence, I had assumed the war would take precedence. You have not the wit to assume, sneered Salt. What evidence have you collected against Bayaz? I stumbled upon something I shouldn't have at the university, then was almost drowned in my bath. So far, nothing. What of the parentage of King Jezal I? That avenue too appears a dead end, or an avenue with my own death at the end, if my owners at Valent and Balk were to hear of it. And they hear everything. The Archlector's lips twisted. Then what the hell have you been doing lately? For the last 3 days I have been busy tearing meaningless confessions from the mouths of innocent men, so that we could appear effective. When was I supposed to find time to bring down the state? Precisely. I have been occupied with seeking Gurkish spies. Why do I never get anything from you but excuses? I have begun to wonder, since your effectiveness has so sharply declined, how you were able to keep Dagoska out of Gurkish hands so long. You must have needed a tremendous sum of money to strengthen the city's defenses. It took all of Glokta's self-control to prevent his eye from twitching straight out of his head. Still, now, you twitching jelly, or we are done. The Guild of Spicers were persuaded to contribute when their own livelihoods were on the line. How uncharacteristically generous of them. Now that I think of it, I find the whole business of Dagoska has a strange flavor. It has always struck me as odd that you chose to dispose of Magister Eider so privately, rather than sending her back to me, from very bad to an awful lot worse. A miscalculation on my part, Your Eminence. I thought that I would spare you the trouble of. Disposing of traitors is no trouble for me. You know that. Angry creases spread out around Salt's hard blue eyes. Could it be, after all we've been through together, you might take me for a fool? Glokta's voice rasped uncomfortably in his dry throat. Absolutely not, Archlector. Merely a lethal megalomaniac. He knows. He knows that I am not entirely the dutiful slave. But How much does he know? And from whom did he learn it? I gave you an impossible task, and so I have allowed you the benefit of the doubt, but your benefit will only last as long as your successes. I grow tired of putting the spur to you. If you do not solve my problems with our new king in the next 2 weeks, I will have Superior Goyle dig out the answers to my questions about Dagoska. I will have him dig them from your twisted flesh if I must. Do I make myself clear? As viscerine glass. 2 weeks to find the answers, or fragments of a butchered corpse found floating by the docks. But if I even ask the questions, Valent and Balk will inform His Eminence of our arrangement, and bloated by seawater, horribly mutilated, far beyond recognition. Alas for poor Superior Glokta, a comely and a well-loved man, but such bad luck. Superior Glokta, what a delightful surprise. Do come in. You sound almost pleased to see me. A rare response indeed to my arrival. Why wouldn't I be? She stepped graciously aside to allow him past. How many girls are lucky enough to have a torturer for a chaperone? There's nothing like it for encouraging the suitors. He hobbled over the threshold. Where is your maid? She got herself all worked up about some Gurkish army or other, so I let her go. He followed her into the warm living room, shutters and curtains closed, illuminated by the shifting glow from the coals on the fire. In fact, I have decided to stay in the city. Really. The tragic princess, pining in her empty castle, abandoned by her faithless servants, wringing her helpless hands while her enemies surround the moat. Glokta snorted. Are you sure you fit the role? Better than you fit that of the knight on the white charger, come to rescue the damsel with blade a-flashing. She looked him scornfully up and down. I'd hoped for a hero with at least half his teeth. I thought you'd be used to getting less than you hoped for by now. I know that I am. What can I say? I'm a romantic. Have you come here only to puncture my dreams? No, I do that without trying. I had in mind a drink and a conversation which did not include the subtext of my mutilated corpse. It is hard to say at this stage what direction our conversation might take, but the drink I can promise you. She poured him a glass and he tossed it back in 4 long swallows. He held it out again, sucking his sweet gums. In all seriousness, the Gurkish are no more than a week from taking Adua under siege. You should leave as soon as possible. She filled his glass again, and then her own. Haven't you noticed that half the city has had the same idea? Such flea-bitten nags not requisitioned by the army are changing hands at 500 marks apiece. Nervous citizens are pouring out to every corner of Midderland. Columns of defenseless refugees, wandering through a mass of mud at a mile a day as the weather turns cold. Laden down with everything of value they possess, easy prey for every brigand within 100 miles. True, Glokta had to admit, as he wriggled his painful way into a chair near the fire. And where would I go to anyway? I swear I have not a single friend or relative anywhere in Midderland. Would you have me hide in the woods, lighting fires by rubbing sticks together and hunting down squirrels with my bare hands? How the hell would I stay drunk in those circumstances? No, thank you. I will be safer here, and considerably more comfortable. I have coal for the fire and the cellar is full to capacity. I can hold out for months. She waved a floppy hand towards the wall. The Gurkish are coming from the west, and we are on the eastern side of town. I could not be safer in the palace itself, I dare say. Perhaps she is right. Here at least, I can keep some kind of watch over her. Very well, I bow to your reasoning, or I would, if my back allowed it. She settled herself opposite. And how is life in the corridors of power? Chilly, as corridors often are. Glokta stroked his lips with a finger. I find myself in a difficult situation. I have some experience with those. This one is complicated. Well then, in terms a dull wench like me might understand. Where's the harm? I stare death in the face already. In the terms of a dull wench, then, imagine this desperately needing certain favors. You have promised your hand in marriage to 2 very rich and powerful men. One would be a fine thing. None would be a fine thing, in this particular case. They are both old and of surpassing ugliness, she shrugged. Ugliness is easily forgiven in the rich and powerful, but both these suitors are prone to violent displays of jealousy. Dangerous displays, if your wanton faithlessness were to become common knowledge. You had hoped to extricate yourself from one promise or the other at some stage, but now the date of the weddings draws near, and you find that you are still considerably entangled with both. More so than ever, in fact. Your response—" She pursed her lips and took a long breath, considering it, then tossed a strand of hair theatrically over her shoulder. "I would drive them both near madness with my matchless wit and smoldering beauty, then engineer a duel between the two. Whichever one would be rewarded with the ultimate prize of my hand in marriage, never suspecting I was once promised also to his rival. Since he is old, I would earnestly hope for his imminent death, leaving me a wealthy and respected widow." She grinned at him down her nose. "What say you to that, sir?" Glokta blinked. "I fear the metaphor has lost its relevance." Or Arde squinted at the ceiling, then snapped her fingers. "I might use my subtle feminine wiles, thrusting back her shoulders and hitching up her bust, to entrap a third man still more powerful and wealthy. Young and handsome and smooth of limb as well, I suppose, since this is a metaphor. I would marry him, and with his help destroy those other two, and abandon them penniless and disappointed." "Ha! What think you?" Glokta felt his eyelid twitching, and he pressed one hand against it. "Interesting. A third suitor," he murmured. The idea had never even occurred. Chapter 36. Scarling's chair. Far below, the water frothed and surged. It had rained hard in the night, and now the river ran high with it, an angry flood chewing mindlessly at the base of the cliff, cold black water and cold white spray against the cold black rock. Tiny shapes, golden yellow, burning orange, vivid purple, all the colors of fire, whisked and wandered with the mad currents, whatever way the rain washed them. Leaves on the water, just like him. And now it looked as if the rain would wash him south, to fight some more, to kill men who'd never heard of him. The idea of it made him want to be sick. But he'd given his word, and a man who doesn't keep his word isn't much of a man at all. That's what Logen's father used to tell him. He spent a lot of long years not keeping to much of anything. His word, and the words of his father, and other men's lives, all meaning less than nothing. All the promises he had made to his wife and to his children had let rot. He'd broken his word to his people, and his friends, and himself, more times than he could count. The Bloody Nine, the most feared man in the north, a man who'd walked all his days in a circle of blood, a man who'd done nothing in all his life but evil. And all the while I'd looked at the sky and shrugged his shoulders, blamed whoever was nearest, and told himself he'd had no choices. Bethod was gone. Logen had vengeance at last, but the world wasn't suddenly a better place. The world was the same, and so was he. He spread out the fingers of his left hand on the damp stone, bent and wonky from a dozen old breaks, knuckles scratched and scabbing, nails cracked and wedged under with dirt. He stared down at the familiar stump for a moment. "Still alive," he whispered, hardly able to believe it. He winced at the pain in his battered ribs, groaned as he turned away from the window and back into the great hall, Bethod's throne room, and now his. The thought tugged a meager belch of laughter out of his gut, but even that stabbed at the mass of stitches through his cheek and up the side of his face. He limped out across the wide floor, every step an ordeal. The sound of his scraping boots echoed in the high rafters, over the whispering of the river down below. Shafts of blurred light, heavy with floating dust, shone down and made criss-cross patterns across the boards. Near to Logen, on a raised-up dais, stood Scarling's chair. The hall and the city and the land around it had all changed far beyond recognition. But Logen reckoned the chair itself was much the same as it had been when Scarling lived. Scarling, hoodless, greatest hero of the North. The man who'd united the clans to fight against the Union long ago. The man who'd drawn the North together with words and gestures for a few brief years at least. A simple seat for a simple man, big, honest chunks of old wood, faded paint around the edges, polished smooth by Scarling's sons and grandsons, and the men who'd led his clans since. Until the Bloody Nine came knocking at the gates of Carleon, until Bethod took the chair for his own, and pretended that he was all that Scarling had been, while he forced the North together with fire and fear and steel. Well then, Logen jerked his head round, saw Black Dow leaning in the doorway, arms folded across his chest. "Ain't you going to sit in it?" Logen shook his head even though his legs were aching so bad he could hardly bear to stand a moment longer. Mud always did for me to sit on. I'm no hero and Scarling was no king. Turned down a crown, as I heard it told. Crowns, Logen spat onto the straw, spit still pink from the cuts in his mouth. Kings, the whole notion's shit. And me the worst choice there could be. You ain't saying no, though, eh? Logen frowned up at him. So some other bastard even worse than Bethod can sit in that chair, make the North bleed some more? Maybe I can do some good with it. Maybe. Dow looked straight back. But some men aren't made for doing good? You talking about me again? Chuckled Crummock, striding in through the doorway, Dogman and Grim at his shoulder. Dogman and Grim at his shoulder. Not all talks about you, Crummock, said Dogman. You sleep all right, Logen? Aye, he lied. Like the dead. What now? Logen stared at that chair. South, I reckon. South, grunted Grim, giving no clue whether he thought it was a good idea or a bad. Logen licked at the ragged flesh at the side of his mouth, checking again, for no reason that made any sense, just how much it hurt. Calder and Scale are still out there, somewhere. No doubt, Bethod sent him to find some help. From out past the Crinna, or up in the high valleys, or wherever. Crummock chuckled softly. Ah, the good work's never done. They'll be causing mischief sooner or later, said Dogman. Small doubt of that. Someone needs to stay back here and keep a watch on things. Hunt those two bastards out if they can. I'll do it, said Black Dow. You sure? Dow shrugged. I don't like boats, and I don't like the Union. Don't need to take no voyage to work that out. And I've got scores enough to settle with Calder and Scale. I'll pick me some Carls out of what's left, and I'll pay him a visit. He flashed his nasty grin and clapped Dogman on the arm. Good luck to the rest of you down there with the Southerners, eh? Try not to get yourselves killed. He narrowed his eyes at Logen. You especially, Bloody Nine? Wouldn't want to lose us another king on the Northmen now, would we? And he sauntered out. Arms folded. How many men we got left over? Might be 300 now. If Dow takes a few. Logen gave a long sigh. Best get 'em ready to leave then. Wouldn't want Furious to go without us. Who'll want to go? Asked Dogman. After what they've been through these past months? Who'll want more killing now? Men who don't know how to do much else, I guess. Logen shrugged. Bethod had gold down there, didn't he? Some. Then share it out. Plenty for each man comes with us. Some now. Some when we get back. Reckon a good few will take the offer. Maybe. Men talk hard for gold. Not sure they'll fight hard for it when the time comes. I reckon we'll see. Dogman stared at him for a long moment. Stared him right in the eye. Why? Because I gave my word. Because I gave my word. Bothered you before, did it? Can't say it did. And there's the problem. Logen swallowed, and his mouth tasted bad. What else can you do but try and do better? Dogman nodded, slow, his eyes not leaving Logen's face. Right you are then, chief? South it is. Said Grim. And the two of them walked out the doorway, leaving just Crummock behind. Off to the Union for you, is it, your majesty? South and kill you some brown men in the sun? South. Logen worked one sore shoulder beside his sore neck, and then the other. You coming? Crummock pushed himself away from the wall and walked forward, finger bones clicking round his thick neck. No, not me. I've relished our time together, so I have. But everything's got an end, don't it? I've been away from my mountains for far too long, and my wives'll be missing me. The chief of the hillmen held his arms out wide, took a step forward, and hugged Logen tight. A little too tight for comfort, if he was being honest. They can have a king if they want one, whispered Crummock in his ear. But I can't say I do, especially not the man who killed my son, eh? Logen felt himself go cold, from the roots of his hair to the tips of his fingers. What did you think? That I wouldn't know? The hillman leaned back to look Logen in the eye. You slaughtered him before the whole world now, didn't you? You butchered little Ron like a sheep for the pot, and him just as helpless as one. They were alone in that wide hall, just the two of them, and the shadows and Scarling's chair. Logen winced as Crummock's arms squeezed tighter, round the bruises and the wounds the Feared's arms had left him. Logen hadn't the strength left now to fight a cat, and they both knew it. The hillman could have crushed him flat and finished the job the fear had started, but he only smiled. "Don't you worry now, bloody nine. I've got what I wanted, haven't I? Bethod's dead and gone, and his feared and his witch and his whole bastard notion of clans united, all back to the mud where they belong. With you in charge, I dare say it'll be 100 years before folk in the north stop killing each other. Meantime, maybe we up in the hills can have some peace, eh?" "Course you can," croaked Logen through his gritted teeth, grimacing as Crummock pressed him even tighter. "You killed my son, that's true, but I've got plenty more. You have to weed the weak ones out, don't you know? The weak and the unlucky. You don't put a wolf amongst your sheep, then cry when you find one eaten, do you?" Logen could only stare. "You really are mad. Maybe I am. But there's worse than me out there." He leaned close again, soft breath in Logen's ear. "I'm not the one killed the boy, am I?" He let Logen free, and he slapped him on the shoulder, the way a friend might, but there was no friendship in it. "Don't ever come up in the high places again, Nine Fingers, that's my advice. I might not be able to give you another friendly reception." He turned and walked away slowly, waving one fat finger over his shoulder. "Don't come up in the high places again, Bloodinin. You're beloved of the moon just a little too much for my taste." Chapter 37, Leadership. Jezal clattered through the cobbled streets, astride a magnificent grey, Bayaz and Marshal Varuz just behind him. A score of Knights of the Body, led by Bremer Dan Gorst, following in full war gear. It was strangely unsettling to see the city, usually so brimful with humanity, close to deserted. Only a scattering of threadbare urchins, of nervous city watchmen, of suspicious commoners remained to hurry out of the way of the royal party as they passed. Most of those citizens who had stayed in Adua were well barricaded in their bedrooms, Jezal imagined. He would have been tempted to do the same, had Queen Therese not beaten him to it. When did they arrive? Bayaz was demanding over the clatter of hooves. The vanguard appeared before dawn. Jezal heard Varus shout back, and more Gurkish troops have been pouring in down the Keln road all morning. There were a few skirmishes in the districts beyond Casimir's wall, but nothing to slow them significantly. They are already halfway to encircling the city. Jezal jerked his head round. "Already?" "The Gurkish always like to come prepared, your majesty." The old soldier urged his horse up beside him. "They have started to construct a palisade around Adua, and have brought 3 great catapults with them, the same ones that proved so effective in their siege of Dagoska. By noon we will be entirely surrounded." Jezal swallowed. There was something about the word surrounded that caused an uncomfortable tightening in his throat. The column slowed to a stately walk as they approached the city's westernmost gate. It was, in an irony that gave Jezal little pleasure, the very same gate through which he had entered the city in triumph before he was crowned High King of the Union. A crowd had gathered in the shadow of Casimir's wall, larger even than the one that had greeted him after his strange victory over the peasants. Today, however, there was hardly a mood of celebration. Smiling girls had been replaced by frowning men, fresh flowers with old weapons, polions stuck up above the press at all angles in an unruly forest, points and edges glinting, pikes and pitchforks, bill hooks and boat hooks, brooms with the twigs removed, and knives nailed in their places. There was a smattering of kings own padded out by some squinting members of the city watch, a few puffed-up tradesmen with leather jerkins and polished swords, some slouching laborers with antique flatbows and tough expressions. These were the very best of what was on offer. They were accompanied by a random assortment of citizens of both sexes and all ages, equipped with a bewildering range of mismatched armor and weapons, or nothing at all. It was difficult to tell who was supposed to be a soldier and who a citizen, if indeed there was still a difference. Every one of them was looking at Jezal as he smartly dismounted, his golden spurs jingling. Looking to him, he realized, as he began to walk out among them, his well-armored bodyguard clanking behind. "These are the defenders of this borough," murmured Jezal to Lord Marshal Varuz, following at his shoulder. "Some of them, your majesty." Accompanied by some enthusiastic townsfolk, a touching spectacle. Jezal would happily have traded a touching crowd for an effective one, but he supposed a leader had always to appear indomitable before his followers. Bayaz had told him so often. How doubly, how triply true of a king before his subjects. especially a king whose grip on his recently won crown might be thought of as slippery at best. So he stood tall, pointed his scarred chin as high as he dared, flicked out his gilt-edged cloak with one gauntleted hand. He strode through the crowd with the confident swagger he had always used to have, one hand resting on the jeweled pommel of his sword, hoping with every step that no one caught an inkling of the cauldron of fear and doubt behind his eyes. The crowd muttered as he swept past, Varus and Bayaz hurrying behind. Some made attempts at bows, others did not bother. The king, I thought he'd be taller. Jezal, the bastard. Jezal snapped his head round, but there was no way of telling who spoke. It's Luther. A cheer for his majesty, followed by a half-hearted murmur. This way, said a pale-looking officer before the gate, indicating a staircase with one apologetic hand. Jezal climbed manfully, 2 stone steps at a time, spurs jingling. He came out onto the roof of the gatehouse and froze, his lip curling with distaste. Who should be standing there but his old friend Superior Glokta, bent over on his cane, his repulsive, toothless smile on his face. "Your Majesty," he leered, voice heavy with irony. "What an almost overwhelming honor." He lifted his cane to point towards the far parapet. "The Gurkish are that way." Jezal was attempting to frame a suitably acidic reply as his eyes followed Glokta's stick. He blinked, the muscles of his face going slack. He stepped past the cripple without saying a word. His scarred jaw crept gradually open and stayed there. "The enemy," growled Varus. Jezal tried to imagine what Logen Ninefingers would have said faced with the sight below him now. Shit! In the patchwork of damp fields, over the roads and through the hedgerows, between the farms and villages and the few coppices of old trees beyond the city walls, Gurkish troops swarmed in their thousands. The wide paved road towards Keln, curving away southwards through the flat farmland, was a single crawling, glittering, heaving river of marching men, Gurkish soldiers in column, flooding up and flowing smoothly out to encircle the city in a giant ring of men, wood, and steel. Tall standards stood out above the boiling throng, golden symbols flashing in the watery autumn sunlight. The standards of the Emperor's legions. Jezal counted 10 at his first glance. "A considerable body of men," said Bayaz with awesome understatement. Glokta grinned. The Gurkish hate to travel alone. The fence that Marshal Varus had referred to earlier was already rising, a dark line winding through the muddy fields a few hundred strides from the walls, a shallow ditch in front of it, more than adequate to prevent supplies or reinforcements reaching the city from outside. Further away, several camps were taking shape. Vast bodies of white tents erected in neatly ordered squares, several with tall columns of dark smoke already floating up into the white sky from cook fires and forges. There was a deeply worrying feeling of permanence about the whole arrangement. Adua might still have been in Union hands, but even the most patriotic liar could not have denied that the city's hinterland already belonged firmly to the Emperor of Gurkul. Yes, their organization. Jezal's voice was suddenly creaky as old floorboards. Putting a brave face on this seemed more like insanity than courage. A dozen horsemen had detached themselves from the Gurkish lines, and now rode forward at a steady trot. 2 long flags streamed above their heads, red and yellow silk, worked with Celtic characters in golden thread. There was a white flag, too, so small as to be barely noticeable. "Parleys," growled the first of the Magi, slowly shaking his head. "What are they but an excuse for old fools who love to hear their own voices to prattle about fair treatment before they start on the butchery? I suppose on the subject of old fools who love to hear their own voices, you are the absolute expert." That was what Jezal thought, but he kept it to himself, watching the Gurkish party approach in brooding silence. A tall man came at their head, gold shining on his sharply pointed helmet, and his polished armor, riding with that upright arrogance that shouts, even from a distance, of high command. Marshal Varus frowned. "General Malzagurt, you know him? He commanded the Emperor's forces during the last war. We grappled with each other for months. We parleyed more than once. A most cunning opponent. You got the better of him, though." "In the end, Your Majesty." Varus looked far from happy. "But I had an army then." The Gurkish commander clattered up the road, through the jumble of deserted buildings scattered beyond Casimir's wall. He reined in his horse before the gate, staring proudly upwards, one hand resting casually on his hip. "I am General Malzagurt," he called in a sharp Kantic accent, "the chosen representative of His Magnificence, Uthman ul-Dasht, Emperor of Gurkul. I am King Jezal I. Of course, the bastard. It was pointless to deny it. That's right, the bastard. Why don't you come in, General? Then we can speak face to face, like civilized men." Malzagurt's eyes flickered across to Glokta. "Forgive me, but the response of your government to unarmed emissaries of the Emperor has not always been civilized. I think I will remain outside the walls. For now, as you wish. I believe you are already acquainted with Lord Marshal Varus, of course. It seems an age since we tussled in the dry wastelands. I would say that I have missed you, but I have not. How are you, my old friend, my old enemy?" "Well enough," grunted Varus. Malzagurt gestured towards the vast array of manpower deploying behind him. "Under the circumstances, eh? I do not know your other. He is Bayaz. First of the Magi, a smooth, even voice. It came from one of Malzagurt's companions. A man, dressed all in simple white, somewhat in the manner of a priest. He seemed hardly older than Jezal, and very handsome with a dark face, perfectly smooth. He wore no armor, carried no weapon. There was no adornment on his clothes or his simple saddle, and yet the others in the party, even Malzagurt himself, seemed to look at him with great respect, with fear, almost. "Ah," the general peered up, stroking thoughtfully at his short gray beard. "So this is Bayaz," the young man nodded. "This is he. It has been a long time." "Not long enough, Mamun, you damned snake." Bayaz clung to the parapet, teeth bared. The old magus was so good at playing the kindly uncle that Jezal had forgotten how terrifying his sudden fury could be. He took a shocked step away, half raising a hand to shield his face. The Gurkish aides and flag carriers cringed, one going so far as to be noisily sick. Even Malzagurt lost a sizable chunk of his heroic bearing. But Mamun gazed up just as levelly as before. "Some among my brothers thought that you would run, but I knew better. Khalul always said your pride would be the end of you, and here is the proof. It seems strange to me now that I once thought you a great man. You look old, Bayaz. You have dwindled. Things seem smaller when they are far above you," growled the first of the Magi. He ground the toe of his staff into the stones under his feet, his voice carrying now a terrible menace. "Come closer, Eater, and you can judge my weakness while you burn. The time was you could have crushed me with a word. I do not doubt it. But now your words are only empty air. Your power has leaked away with the slow years, while mine has never been greater. I have 100 brothers and sisters behind me." "What allies have you, Bayaz?" He swept the battlements with a mocking smile. "Only such as you deserve. I may yet find allies to surprise you." "I doubt it. Long ago, Khalul told me what your final desperate hope would be. Time proved him right, as it always has. So you went to the very edge of the world, chasing shadows. Dark shadows indeed. For one who calls himself righteous. I know that you failed." The priest showed 2 rows of perfect white teeth. "The seed passed out of history, long ago. Interred, dark leagues beneath the earth. Sunk, far below the bottomless ocean. Your hopes are sunk with it. You have only one choice left to you. Will you come with us willingly and be judged by Khalul for your betrayal, or must we come in and take you? You dare to speak to me of betrayal? You who betrayed the highest principles of our order and broke the sacred law of Eus. How many have you murdered so that you could be powerful?" Mamun only shrugged. "Very many. I am not proud. You left us a choice of dark paths, Bayaz, and we made the sacrifices we had to. There is no purpose in our arguing over the past. After these long centuries standing on opposite sides of a great divide, I think neither one of us will convince the other. The victors can decide who was right, just as they always have, since long before the old time. I know your answer already, but the Prophet would have me ask a question. Will you come to Sarkant and answer for your great crimes? Will you be judged by Khalul?" "Judged," snarled Bayaz. "He will judge me, the swollen-headed old murderer." He bartosh laughter down from the walls. "Come and take me if you dare, Mamun. I will be waiting." "Then we will come," murmured Kalul's first apprentice, frowning up from under his fine black brows. "We have been preparing long years to do it." The two men fell to sullen glaring, and Jezal frowned with them. He resented the sudden feeling that the whole business was somehow an argument between Bayaz and this priest, and that he, although a king, was like a child eavesdropping on his parents' conversation, and with just as little say in the outcome. "Speak your terms, General," he bellowed down. Malzagurt cleared his throat. "Firstly, if you surrender the city of Adua to the Emperor, he is prepared to allow you to retain your throne, as his subject, of course, paying regular tribute." How generous of him. "What of the traitor, Lord Brock? We understood that you have promised him the crown of the Union. We are not altogether committed to Lord Brock. He does not hold the city after all. You do." "Do, and we have scant respect for those who turn on their own masters," added Mamun, with a dark look up at Bayaz. "Secondly, the citizens of the Union will be permitted to continue to live according to their own laws and customs. They will continue to live in freedom, or as close to it as they have ever really been, at least. Your generosity is astonishing." Jezal had meant to sneer it, but in the end it escaped without much irony. "Thirdly," shouted the general, with a nervous glance sideways towards Mamun, "the man known as Bayaz, the first of the Magi, will be delivered over to us, bound and in chains, that he may be conveyed to the temple of Sarkant, for judgment by Thetath, Prophet Kalul. Those are our terms. Refuse them, and the Emperor has decreed that Midderland shall be treated as any other conquered province. Many will be killed, and many more made slaves. Gurkish governors will be installed. Your Agrient will be made a temple, and your current rulers conveyed to cells beneath the Emperor's palace." Jezal half opened his mouth to refuse on an instinct. Then he paused. Herod the Great, no doubt, would have spat his defiance at any odds, and probably pissed on the emissary to boot. The slightest notion of negotiating with the Gurkish was against every long-held belief he possessed. But, thinking about it, the terms were far more generous than he had ever expected. Jezal would probably have enjoyed more authority as a subject of Uthman ul-Dasht than he did with Bayaz staring over his shoulder every moment of every day. He could save lives by saying a word. Real lives of real people. He reached up and rubbed gently at his scarred lips with a fingertip. He had experienced enough suffering on the endless plains of the old empire to think long and hard about risking so much pain to so many, and himself in particular. The notion of cells beneath the Emperor's palace caused him some pause. It was bizarre that such a vital decision should fall to him. A man who, no more than a year ago, had proudly confessed to knowing nothing about anything, and caring still less. But then Jezal was beginning to doubt that anyone in a position of high authority ever really knew what they were doing. The best one could hope for was to maintain some shred of an illusion that one might, and occasionally, perhaps, try to give the mindless flood of events the slightest push in one direction or another, hoping desperately that it would turn out to be the right one. But what was the right one? "Give me your answer," shouted Malzagurt. "I have preparations to make." Jezal frowned. He was sick of being dictated to by Bayaz, but at least the old bastard had played some role in his ascension to the throne. He was sick of being slighted by Therese, but at least she was his wife. Quite aside from any other consideration, his patience was stretched very thin. He simply refused to be ordered around at sword point by some posturing Gurkish general and his damn fool priest. "I reject your terms," he called airily down from the walls. "I reject them utterly and completely. I am not in the habit of surrendering my advisors or my cities, or my sovereignty simply when asked. Particularly not to a pack of Gurkish curs with small manners and even smaller wits. You are not in Gurkul now, General, and here your arrogance becomes you even less than that absurd helmet. I suspect that you will learn a harsh lesson before you leave these shores. Might I add, before you scuttle off, that I encourage you and your priest to fuck each other. Who knows? Perhaps you could persuade the great Uthman ul-Dashtan, the all-knowing Prophet Kalul too, for that matter to join you." General Malzagurt frowned. He conferred quickly with an aide, evidently having not entirely understood the finer points of that last utterance. Once he had finally taken them in, he gave an angry slash of his dark hand and barked an order in Cantic. Jezal saw men moving among the buildings scattered outside the walls, torches in their hands. The Gurkish general took one last look up at the gatehouse. "Damn pinks," he snarled. "Animals!" And he tore at the reins of his horse and sprang away, his officers clattering after him. The priest Mamun sat there a moment longer, a sadness on his perfect face. "So be it. We will put on our armor." "May God forgive you, Bayaz. You need forgiveness more than I, Mamun. Pray for yourself. So I do, every day. But I have seen no sign in all my long life that God is the forgiving kind." Mamun turned his horse away from the gates and rode slowly back towards the Gurkish lines, through the abandoned buildings, flames already licking hungrily at their walls. Jezal took a long, ragged breath as his eyes flicked up to the mass of men moving through the fields. Damn his mouth, it got him in all kinds of trouble. But it was a little late now for second thoughts. He felt Bayaz's fatherly touch on his shoulder, that steering touch that had become so very annoying to him over the past few weeks. He had to grit his teeth to keep from shaking free. "You should address your people," said the Magus. "What?" The right words could make all the difference. Herod the Great could speak at a moment's notice. "Did I tell you of the time he—" "Very well," snapped Jezal. "I am going." He walked towards the opposite parapet with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man to his scaffold. The crowd was spread out below in all its disturbing variety. Jezal had to stop himself fussing with his belt buckle. He kept worrying for some reason that his trousers would fall down in front of all those people. A ridiculous notion. He cleared his throat. Someone saw him, pointed. "The king, King Jezal, the king speaks." The crowd shifted and stretched, drawn towards the gatehouse, a sea of hopeful, fearful, needy faces. The noise in the square slowly died, and a breathless silence fell. "My friends, my countrymen, my subjects?" His voice rang out with pleasing authority. "A good beginning, very rhetorical. Our enemies may be many, very many." Jezal cursed to himself. That was hardly an admission to give courage to the masses. "But I urge you to take heart. Our defenses are strong. Our defenses are strong." He slapped at the firm stones under his hand. "Our courage is indomitable." He thumped at his polished breastplate. "We will hold firm." This was better. He had discovered a natural talent for speaking. The crowd was warming to him now, he could feel it. "We need not hold out forever. Lord Marshal West is even now bringing his army to our assistance." "When?" someone screamed out. There was a wave of angry muttering. Jezal, wrong-footed, glanced nervously across at Bayaz. When will they come?" "When?" The first of the Magi hissed at Glokta, and the cripple made a sharp gesture to someone below. "Soon. You may depend upon it." Curse Bayaz. This had been an awful notion. Jezal did not have the ghost of an idea of how to put heart into a rabble. "What about our children? What about our homes? Will your house burn? Will it?" A swell of unhappy calls went up. "Do not fear, I beg of you, please." Damn it, he had no business pleading. He was a king. "The army is on its way." Jezal noticed black figures forcing through the press. Practicals of the Inquisition. They converged somewhat to his relief, on the point where the heckles were coming from. They are even now leaving the north. Any day they will come to our aid, and teach these Gurkish dogs, when? When will? Black sticks rose and fell in the midst of the crowd, and the question was cut off in a high-pitched shriek. Jezal did his best to shout over it. "In the meantime, will we let these Gurkish scum ride free over our fields, over the fields of our fathers?" "No," someone roared, to Jezal's great relief. "No. We will show these Cantic slaves how a free Union citizen can fight. A volley of lukewarm agreements. We will fight as bravely as lions, as fiercely as tigers." He was warming to his work now. The words were spilling out as if he really meant them. Perhaps he did. "We will fight as we did in the days of Herod, of Arnault, of Casimir." A rousing cheer went up. "We will not rest until these Gurkish devils are driven back across the Circle Sea." There will be no negotiation. No negotiation, someone called. Damn the Gurkish! We will never surrender, Jezal bellowed, striking the parapet with his fist. We will fight for every street, for every house, for every room, for every house, someone squealed with rabid excitement, and the citizens of Adua bellowed their approval. Feeling the moment upon him, Jezal slid his sword from its sheath with a suitably warlike ringing and held it high above his head. And I will be proud to draw my sword beside you. We will fight for each other. We will fight for the Union. Every man, every woman a hero. There was a deafening cheer. Jezal waved his sword, and a glittering wave surged out among the spears as they were shaken in the air, thumped against armored chests, hammered down against the stone. Jezal smiled wide. The people loved him, and were more than willing to fight for him. Together they would be victorious, he felt it. He had made the right decision. Nicely done, murmured Bayaz in his ear. Nicely. Jezal's patience was worn out. He rounded on the magus with his teeth bared. I know how it was done. I have no need of your constant, your majesty. It was Gorst's piping voice. How dare you interrupt me? What the hell is— Jezal's tirade was cut off by a ruddy glare at the corner of his eye, followed a moment later by a roaring detonation. He jerked his head round to see flames springing up above the jumble of roofs, some distance away on his right. Below in the square there was a collective gasp, a wave of nervous movement through the crowd. The Gurkish bombardment has begun, said Varuz. A streak of fire shot up into the white sky above the Gurkish lines. Jezal watched it open-mouthed as it plummeted down towards the city. It crashed into the buildings, this time on Jezal's left, bright fire shooting high into the air. The terrifying boom assaulted his ears an instant afterward. Shouts came from below. Orders, perhaps, or screams of panic. The crowd began to move in every direction at once. People rushed for the walls, or for their homes, or nowhere in particular. A chaotic tangle of pressing bodies and waving polearms. "Water!" someone shouted. "Fire! Your Majesty!" Gorst was already leading Jezal back towards the stairway. "You should return to the Agrient at once." Jezal started at another thunderous explosion, this one even closer. Smoke was already rising in oily smudges over the city. "Yes," he muttered, allowing himself to be led to safety. He realized that he still had his sword drawn, and sheathed it somewhat guiltily. Yes, of course. Fearlessness, as Logen Ninefingers had once observed, is a fool's boast. Chapter 38. A Rock and a Hard Place. Glokta shook with laughter, wheezing gurgles slobbering through his empty gums, the hard chair creaking under his bony arse. His coughs and his whimpers echoed dully from the bare walls of his dim living room. In a way, it sounded very much like weeping, and perhaps it is, just a little. Every shake of his twisted shoulders drove nails into his neck. Every jerk of his rib cage sent flashes of pain down to the very tips of such toes as he had left. He laughed, and the laughter hurt, and the pain made him laugh all the more. Bubbles of spit blew from his lips as he gave one last long whine, like a sheep's death rattle, but less dignified. Then he swallowed and wiped his running eyes. I have not laughed so hard in years, since before the Emperor's torturers did their work. I shouldn't wonder. And yet it is not so very difficult to stop. After all, nothing is really very funny here, is it? He lifted the letter and read it again. Superior Glokta, my employers at the banking house of Valent and Balk, are more than disappointed with your progress. It is some time now since I asked you in person to inform us of Archlector Sult's plans, in particular, the reasons for his continuing interest in the university. Since then we have received no communication from you. It may be that you believe the sudden arrival of the Gurkish beyond the city walls has altered the expectations of my employers. It has not, in any way whatsoever. Nothing will. You will report to us within the week, or His Eminence will be informed of your divided loyalties. I need hardly add that it would be wise for you to destroy this letter. Mothis Glokta stared at the paper for a long while by the light of the single candle, his ruined mouth hanging open. For this, I lived through months of agony in the darkness of the Emperor's prisons, tortured my savage way through the Guild of Mercers, slaughtered my bloody path through the city of Dagoska, to end my days in ignominy. trapped between a bitter old bureaucrat and a bank full of treacherous swindlers. All my twisting, my lying, my bargains, and my pain. All those corpses left beside the road for this. A new wave of laughter rocked his body, twisted him up and made his aching back rattle. His Eminence and these bankers deserve each other. Even with the city burning down around them, their games cannot stop for an instant. Games which may very well prove fatal to poor superior Glokta, who only tried to do his crippled best. He had to wipe a little snot from under his nose. He laughed so hard at that last thought. It almost seems a shame to burn such a horribly hilarious document. Perhaps I should take it to the Archlector instead? Would he see the funny side, I wonder? Would we chuckle over it together? He reached out and held the corner of the letter to the twisting candle flame, watched fire flicker up the side, creep out through the writing, white paper curling up into black ashes, burn, as my hopes, and my dreams, and my glorious future burned beneath the Emperor's palace. Burn, as Dagoska did, and Adua surely will before the Emperor's fury. Burn, as I would love to burn King Jezal the bastard, and the first of the Magi, and Archlector Sult, and Valent and Balk, and the whole damned Glokta flailed his singed fingertips in the air, then stuck them in his toothless mouth. His laughter quickly cut off. Strange. However much pain we experience, we never become used to it. We always scramble to escape it. We never become resigned to more. The corner of the letter was still smoldering on the floor. He frowned and ground it out with a savage poke of his cane. The air was heavy with the sharp tang of wood smoke, like 100,000 burnt dinners. Even here in the Agrient, there was the slightest gray haze of it, a messy blending together of the buildings at the end of each street. Fires had been raging in the outer districts for several days now, and the Gurkish bombardment had not let up a hair, night or day. Even as Glokta walked, the breath wheezing through the gaps in his teeth with the effort of putting one foot in front of the other, there came the muffled boom of an incendiary landing somewhere in the city, the tiniest murmur of vibration through the soles of his boots. The people in the lane froze, staring up in alarm. Those few unlucky folk who found themselves without excuses to flee the city when the Gurkish came, those unlucky folk who were too important, or not important enough. An optimistic handful who thought the Gurkish siege would be another passing fad like a rainstorm or short trousers. Too late they discover their grave error. Glokta kept hobbling, head lowered. He had not lost a wink of sleep for the explosions rocking the city in the darkness the past week. I was too busy losing sleep for my mind spinning round and round like a cat in a sack, trying to find some way clear of this trap. I became well used to explosions during my holiday in charming Dagoska. For him, the pain lancing through his arse and up his spine was considerably more worrisome. Oh, arrogance! Who would ever have dared suggest that Gurkish boots would one day trample across the fertile fields of Midderland, that the pretty farms and sleepy villages of the Union would dance with Gurkish fire? Who could ever have expected that beautiful, thriving Adua would turn from a little piece of heaven into a little piece of hell? Glokta felt himself smiling. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I've been here all along. How nice of you to join me. He heard armored boots tramping down the road behind him, shuffled too late out of the way of a hurrying column of soldiers, and was barged roughly onto the grassy verge, left foot sliding in the mud, and sending a stab of agony up his leg. The column clattered past, heedless, and Glokta grimaced after them. People no longer have the proper level of fear for the Inquisition. They are all a great deal too afraid of the Gurkish for that. He stepped away from the wall with a wince and a curse, stretched his neck out and carried on limping. High Justice Morovia was framed in the largest window of his echoing office, hands clasped behind his back. His windows faced west, the direction of the main Gurkish assault. Above the rooftops in the distance, columns of dark smoke rose into the pale sky, blending together into a gritty pall that rendered the autumn half-light still more funereal. Morovia turned when he heard Glokta's toeless foot creaking on the dark boards, his lined old face alive with a welcoming smile. "Ah, Superior Glokta, you cannot imagine my delight to hear you announced. I have missed you since your last visit. I do so enjoy your forthright style. I do so admire your commitment to your work." He flapped one lazy hand towards the window. "The law, I must admit, tends to be sleepy in times of war. But even with the Gurkish at the gates, the noble business of His Majesty's Inquisition continues, eh? I assume you have come once again on behalf of His Eminence." Glokta paused, but only out of habit. "I must turn my twisted back on the Inquisition. What would Salt call me? A traitor, no doubt, and worse besides. But every man's first loyalty must be to himself. I have made my sacrifices. No, your worship. I have come on behalf of Sandan Glokta." He limped up to a chair, slid it out and dumped himself into it without being asked. "I am far past the niceties now. Frankly, I need your help. Frankly, you are my last hope. My help. My help. Surely you are not without powerful friends of your own. It is my regrettable experience that powerful men can afford no friends. All too unfortunately true. You do not reach my position, or even yours, without understanding that each man stands alone, in the end." Morovia gazed down beneficently as he settled into his own tall chair, "though I am far from put at ease. His smiles are every bit as deadly as Salt's frowns, I think. Our friends must be those that can make themselves useful to us. With that in mind, what help can I offer you? And more importantly, what can you offer me in return? That may take some explaining." Glokta winced at a cramp in his leg and forced it out straight under the table. "May I speak entirely honestly with you, your worship?" Morovia stroked thoughtfully at his beard. "The truth is a very rare and valuable commodity. I am astonished that a man of your experience would simply give it away, especially to someone on the other side of the fence, so to speak. I was once told that a man lost in the desert must take such water as he is offered, regardless of the source." "Lost, are you? Speak honestly then, superior, and we will see if I can spare something from my canteen. Hardly a promise of succor, but the best I might have hoped for from a man so recently a bitter enemy. And so my confession." Glokta turned over the memories of the last couple of years in his mind. "And a filthy, a shameful, an ugly set they are. Where to begin? Where to begin? It is some time ago now that I began to examine irregularities in the business of the Honorable Guild of Mercers. I well remember the unfortunate affair. During my investigations, I discovered that the Mercers were financed by a bank, a very wealthy and powerful bank, Valent and Bok." Glokta watched carefully for a reaction, but Morovia's eyes did not so much as flicker. "I am aware of the existence of such an institution. I suspected that they were implicated in the Mercers' crimes. Magister Kalt told me as much before his unfortunate demise, but His Eminence did not wish me to investigate further. Too many complications at a complicated time." Glokta's left eye twitched, and he felt it beginning to run. "My apologies," he muttered as he wiped it with a finger. "Shortly afterwards I was dispatched to Dagoska to take charge of the defense of the city. Your particular diligence in that matter was a source of some discomfort to me." Morovia worked his mouth sourly. "My congratulations. You did an extraordinary job. I cannot entirely take the credit. The task the Archlector had given me was impossible." Dagoska was riddled with treason and surrounded by the Gurkish. Morovia snorted. One sympathizes. If only anyone had sympathized then, but they were busy here, trying to get the better of each other, as they always are. Dagoska's defenses were in a state entirely inadequate for the task. I could not strengthen them without money. His Eminence was not forthcoming. His Eminence would not part with a single mark. But an unlikely benefactor stepped forward in my time of need. A rich uncle. What a happy chance. Not entirely. Glokta licked at the salty space where his front teeth had once been. And the secrets began to spill like turds from a draining latrinepet. My rich uncle was none other than the banking house of Valent and Bok. Morovia frowned. They advanced you money. It was thanks to their generosity that I was able to keep the Gurkish out as long as I did, bearing in mind that powerful people have no friends. What did Valent and Bok get in return? In essence, Glokta gave the High Justice an even stare. Whatever they wanted. Shortly after returning from Dagoska, I was investigating the death of Crown Prince Reno, a terrible crime, of which the Gurkish ambassador who hung for it was innocent. Morovia registered the tiniest hint of surprise. You say so? Undoubtedly. But the death of the heir to the throne created other problems relating to votes in the open council, and His Eminence was happy with the easy answer. I tried to pursue the matter, but was prevented by Valint and Balk. You suspect that these bankers were involved in the death of the crown prince, then? I suspect them of all manner of things, but proof is in short supply. Always too many suspicions, and not enough proof. Banks, grunted Morovia. They are made of air. They spin money out of guesses and lies and promises. Secrets are their currency, even more than gold. So I have discovered. But men lost in the desert. Ice, yes. Please continue. Glokta found to his surprise that he was greatly enjoying himself. He was almost tripping over his own tongue in his eagerness to blurt it all out. Now I begin throwing away the secrets I have hoarded for so long. I find I cannot stop. I feel like a miser on a spending spree. Horrified, yet liberated. Agonized, yet delighted. Something like cutting your own throat, I imagine a glorious release. But one you can enjoy only once. And like cutting my own throat, it will very likely end in my ugly death. Ah, well, it has been coming some time, has it not? And not even I could claim I don't deserve it 10 times over. Glokta leaned forwards. Even here, even now, I somehow need to speak it softly. Archlector Zult is not happy with our new king. Most particularly, he is not happy with the influence that Bayaz exerts over him. Zult finds his powers much curtailed. He believes, in fact, that you are somehow behind the whole business. Morovia frowned. Does he now? He does, and I am not entirely sure that I discount the possibility. He has asked me to find some means of removing Bayaz, his voice dropped almost to a whisper, or removing the king. I suspect, should I fail, that he has other plans. Plans which somehow involve the university. You would seem to be accusing His Eminence the Archlector of high treason against the state. Morovia's eyes were bright and hard as a pair of new nails. Suspicious, and yet terribly eager. Have you uncovered anything to use against the king? Before I could even consider doing so, Valint and Balk quite forcibly dissuaded me. They knew so quickly. I am forced to concede that someone close to me may not be as reliable as I have always hoped. The bankers not only demanded that I disobey His Eminence, they also insisted that I investigate him. They want to know his plans. I have only a few days to satisfy them, and Zult no longer trusts me enough to share the contents of his latrine with me, let alone the contents of his mind. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Morovia slowly shook his head. Oh dear. To add to my woes, I believe that the Archlector is considerably less ignorant of what occurred in Dagoska than he at first appeared. If somebody is talking, it may well be that they are talking to both sides. If you can betray a man once, after all, it is not so very difficult to do it twice. Glokta gave a long sigh. And there we are. The secrets are all spilled. The turd pit is emptied. My throat is slashed from ear to ear. That is the whole story, your worship. Well, Superior, you certainly find yourself in quite a pickle. Quite a fatal one, in fact. Morovia got up and wandered slowly around the room. Let us suppose for the moment that you truly have come for my help, and not to lead me into some manner of embarrassment. Archlector Zult has the means to cause a most serious problem, and the towering self-obsession necessary to try it at a time like this. You'll get no argument from me there. If you could obtain compelling evidence, I would, of course, be willing to present it to the king. But I cannot move against a member of the closed council, and the Archlector in particular, without firm proof. A signed confession would be best. Zult's signed confession? Murmured Glokta. Such a document would seem to solve some problems for both of us. Zult would be gone, and the bankers would have lost their hold over you. The Gurkish would still be camped outside our walls, of course, but one can't have everything. The Archlector's signed confession. And shall I pluck the moon from the sky while I'm about it? I understand that you are expert at obtaining them. The High Justice peered at Glokta from under his heavy brows. Was I misinformed? I cannot conjure evidence from thin air, your worship. Those lost in the desert must take the chances they are offered, however slender. Find evidence, and bring it to me. Then I can act, and not one moment before. You understand that I cannot take any risks for you. It is difficult to trust a man who chose his master, and now chooses another. Chose? Glokta felt his eyelid twitching again. If you believe that I chose any part of the pitiful shadow of a life you see before you, you are very much mistaken. I chose glory and success. The box did not contain what was written on the lid. The world is full of tragic tales. Morovia walked to the window, turning his back and staring out at the darkening sky. Especially now. You can hardly expect them to make any difference to a man of my experience. I wish you good day. Further comment seems pointless. Glokta rocked forwards, pushed himself painfully up to standing with the aid of his cane, and limped for the door. But the tiniest glimmer of hope has come creeping into the dank cellar of my despair. I need only obtain a confession to high treason from the head of His Majesty's Inquisition and... Superior. Why can no one ever finish talking before I get up? Glokta turned back into the room, his spine burning. If someone close to you is talking, you need to shut them up. Oh, you need not worry about my garden, your worship. Glokta treated the High Justice to his most repulsive grin. I am even now sharpening my shears. Chapter 39, Charity. Adua burned. The two westernmost districts, the three farms, at the southwestern corner of the city, and the arches, further north, were hacked with black wounds. Smoke was still pouring up from some of them. Great columns lit in faint orange near the base. They spread out in oily smears, dragged away to the west by a stiff wind, drawing a muddy curtain across the setting sun. Jezal watched in solemn silence, his hands bunched into numb fists on the parapet of the Tower of Chains. There was no sound up here but for the wind fumbling at his ears and, just occasionally, the slightest hint of distant battle, a war cry or the screams of the wounded. Or perhaps only a seabird calling, high on the breeze. Jezal wished for a maudlin moment that he were a bird, and could simply fly from the tower and off over the Gurkish pickets, away from this nightmare. But escape would not be so easy. Casimir's wall was first breached 3 days ago. Marshal Varus was explaining in a monotonous drone. We drove back the first 2 assaults, and held the 3 farms that night, but the next day there was another breach, and another. This damn fire powder has changed all the bloody rules. A wall that would have stood a week they can bring down in an hour. Khalul always loved to tinker with his dust and his bottles, muttered Bayaz, unhelpfully. They were in the 3 farms in force that night, and carried the gates into the arches soon afterwards. Ever since, the whole western part of the city has been one running battle. The tavern where Jezal had celebrated his victory over Filio in the contest was in that district. The tavern where he had sat with West and Jalenhorm, Caspa, and Brint before they went away to the north, and he to the old empire. Was that building now burning? Was it already a blackened shell? We're fighting them hand to hand in the streets by daylight. We're mounting raids in the darkness every night. Not a stride of ground is given up without it being soaked with Gurkish blood. Perhaps Varus hoped to be inspiring, but he was only succeeding in making Jezal feel sick. The streets of his capital soaked in blood, whoever's blood it might have been, was hardly his first aim as king of the Union. Anos wall still stands firm, though there are fires burning in the center of town. The flames almost reached the 4 corners last night, but the rain doused them down, at least for now. We're fighting for every street, every house, every room. Just as you said we should, Your Majesty. Good. Jezal managed to croak, but he almost choked on the word. When he so blithely turned down General Malzagert's terms, he was not sure what he had been expecting. He had dimly imagined that someone would soon come to the rescue, that something heroic would occur. Only now the bloody business was well underway, and there was no sign of instant deliverance. Probably there was heroism going on down there in the smoke. Soldiers hauling injured comrades to safety through the sooty darkness. Nurses stitching wounds by screaming candlelight. Townsfolk plunging into burning buildings to drag out coughing children. Heroism of an everyday and unglamorous kind. A kind that made no difference to the overall outcome. Are those our ships in the bay? He asked quietly, already afraid of the answer. I wish they were, Your Majesty. I never thought I'd say it, but they have the best of us by sea. You never saw so many damn ships. Even if most of our navy weren't ferrying the army back from England, I'm not sure what they could do. As it is, The men will have to be landed outside the city. It's a damned inconvenience, and it could get to be a great deal more than that. The docks are a weak spot. Sooner or later they may try to land men there. Jezal looked nervously towards the water. Armies of Gurkish, pouring from their ships and into the heart of the city. The middleway cut straight through the center of Adua from the bay to the Agrient, a road invitingly wide enough to march an entire Gurkish legion straight down in a twinkling. He shut his eyes and tried to breathe evenly. Before the arrival of the Gurkish, he had hardly been able to have a moment's silence for the opinions of his counselors. Now that he actually needed advice, the torrent had suddenly run dry. Zult rarely appeared in the closed council, and then only to glare at Morovia. The High Justice himself had little to offer beyond bemoaning the fix they were all in. Even Bayaz's stock of historical examples seemed finally to be exhausted. Jezal was left to carry the responsibility alone, and he was finding it quite a weight. He supposed it was a good deal more unpleasant for those that were actually wounded, or homeless, or killed, but that was slender consolation. How many are dead already? He found himself asking, like a child picking at a scab. How many have we lost? The fighting along Casimir's wall was fierce. The fighting throughout the occupied districts has been fiercer yet. Casualties on both sides are heavy. I would guess at 1,000 dead, at least on our side. Jezal swallowed sour spit. He thought about the mismatched defenders he had seen near the western gate, in a square now presumably overrun by Gurkish legions. Ordinary people who had looked to him with hope and pride. Then he tried to picture what 1,000 corpses might look like. He imagined 100 of them, side by side, in a row. Then 10 such rows, one above the other. 1,000. He gnawed at his thumbnail, already down to the painful quick. And any more wounded, of course, added Varuz, in a sudden twist of the knife. We are very short of space for them, in fact. 2 districts are at least partly occupied by the Gurkish, and the enemy are landing incendiaries almost in the heart of the city. Jezal's tongue sought out the still sore gap in his teeth. He remembered his own pain, out on the endless plain under the merciless sky, the stabs through his face as the cartwheels squeaked and jolted. Open the Agrient to the wounded, to the homeless. With the army away, there is room to spare. Barracks for thousands and ample provisions. Bayaz was shaking his bald head. A risk. We have no way of knowing who we would be letting in. Gurkish agents, spies of Kalul. Not all of them are what they appear. Jezal ground his teeth. I am prepared to take the risk. Am I king here, or not? You are, growled Bayaz, and you would be well advised to act like it. This is no time for sentiment. The enemy are closing on Arnault's wall. In places they might be within 2 miles of where we stand. 2 miles, murmured Jezal, his eyes flickering nervously towards the west again. Arnault's wall was a fine grey line through the buildings, looking a terribly frail sort of a barrier from up here, and worryingly close. A sudden fear gripped him. Not the guilty concern he felt for the theoretical people down there in the smoke, but a real and very personal fear for his own life, like the one he had felt among the stones when the 2 warriors advanced on him with murder in mind. Perhaps he had made a mistake not leaving the city when he had the chance. Perhaps it was not too late to, I will stand or fall alongside the people of the Union, he shouted, as angry at his own cowardice as he was at the Magus. If they are willing to die for me, then I am willing to die for them. He turned his shoulder towards Bayaz and quickly looked away. Open the Agrient, Marshal Varuz. You can fill the palace with wounded too if you have to. Varuz glanced nervously sideways at Bayaz, then gave a stiff bow. Hospitals will be set up in the Agrient then, Your Majesty. The barracks will be open to the people. The palace we had probably better leave sealed, at least until things get worse. Jezal could hardly bear to imagine what worse might look like. Good, good. See it done. He had to wipe a tear from under his eye as he turned away from the smoldering city and made for the long stair. The smoke, of course. Nothing but the smoke. Queen Therese sat alone, framed in the window of their vast bedchamber. The Countess Shayla was still lurking around the palace somewhere, but it seemed she had learned to keep her scorn well out of Jezal's way. The rest of Therese ladies she had sent back to Styria before the Gurkish blockaded the harbour. Jezal rather wished that he could have returned the queen herself along with the rest, but that unfortunately was not an option. Therese did not so much as glance in his direction as Jezal shut the door. He had to stifle a heavy sigh as he trudged across the room, his boots muddy from the spitting rain, his skin greasy from the soot in the air outside. "You are treading dirt with you," said Therese, without looking round, her voice as icy as ever. "War's a dirty business, my love." He saw the side of her face twitch with disgust when he said the last two words, and hardly knew whether he wanted to laugh or cry at it. He dropped down heavily in the chair opposite her without touching his boots, knowing all the while that it would infuriate her. There was nothing he could do that would not. "Must you come to me in this manner?" she snapped. "Oh, but I could not stay away. You are my wife, after all. Not by choice. It was not my choice either, but I am willing to make the best of things. Believe it or not, I would rather have married someone who did not hate me." Jezal shoved one hand through his hair and pressed his anger down with some difficulty. "But let us not fight, please. I have enough fighting to do out there. More than I can stand. Can we not, at least, be civil to one another?" She looked at him for a long moment, a thoughtful frown on her face. What? "Keep trying." Jezal ventured a fragment of a grin. "I had hoped that you might come to admire my persistence, if nothing else." She did not smile, but he sensed perhaps the slightest softening of the hard line of her mouth. He hardly dared suppose that she might have finally begun to thaw, but he was willing to seize on the slightest shred of hope. Hope was in short supply these days. He leaned towards her, staring earnestly into her eyes. "You have made it clear that you think very little of me, and I suppose that I hardly blame you. I do not think so very much of myself, believe me. But I am trying very hard to be a better man." The corner of Therese's mouth twitched up in a sad kind of smile, but a kind of smile nonetheless. To his great surprise, she reached out and placed one hand tenderly on his face. His breath caught in his throat, skin tingling where her fingertips rested. "Why can you not understand that I despise you?" she asked. He felt himself go very cold. "I despise the look of you, the feel of you, the sound of your voice. I despise this place and its people. The sooner the Gurkish burn it all to the ground, the happier I'll be." She took her hand away and turned back to the window, a glimmering of light down her perfect profile. Jezal slowly stood up. "I think I will find another room to sleep in tonight. This one is altogether too cold." At last, it can be a terrible curse for a man to get everything he ever dreamed of. If the shining prizes turn out somehow to be empty baubles, he is left without even his dreams for comfort. All the things that Jezal had thought he wanted, power, fame, the beautiful trappings of greatness, they were nothing but dust. All he wanted now was for things to be as they had been, before he got them. But there was no way back. Not ever. He really had nothing further to say. He turned stiffly and trudged for the door. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.